Viana Asa Eliant was born the legitimate heir of the Marquise and was always at the center of events wherever she went. Even at the peak of her success, she took everything for granted, as if the whole world lay at her feet. But that picture was only a mirage created by her dreams. This foolish woman was looking for love. She desired what was never hers. Having everything, she still longed for more. And all she had to do was get rid of her ill-wishers. And don't forget who she really is. The rays of the bright morning sun broke through the clouds, illuminating everything around, and birds were chirping outside the window. The girl woke up and wanted to catch one of these golden rays with her hand. Everything around her was familiar, but at the same time alien. The room she was in was exactly like the one she remembered. Getting out of bed, the heroine went to the mirror and looked at her reflection in it. This face was well known to her. It reflected Viana Asa Eliant, and Legia shouldn't forget that she was now Viana. Perhaps she became her reincarnation, or maybe Legia herself wanted to change her boring life. Or maybe she is a young Viana who saw her future. Although perhaps this is all just a dream. But one thing was clear. She was Viona Asa Eliant, who died cursing this world. And she was Legia, who lived an ordinary life in her past incarnation. And now she was Viana again, standing in front of the mirror, filled with strange feelings, because she held the memories of two lives at once. Suddenly, the girl heard someone enter the room and turned around. It was one of the maids. She didn't know that the mistress had already woken up and was very scared. And then she ran to make water for washing. The maid ran away so quickly that Viana didn't have time to say a word. But given the character of the hostess, this was not surprising. Warm water for washing, a carefully selected dress and jewelry. Everything had to be ready for her awakening. Previously, even the slightest mistake would make the hostess angry for the whole day. At least that was the case until yesterday. The maid brought water with shaking hands. Looking at her, Viana asked her name. But the girl became even more frightened by this question, and, trembling all over, could not utter a word. Then the hostess repeated her question. Viana understood that the maid did not expect to hear this. From the rough hands and skin, it was clear that this was only a low-ranking servant. The girl did not understand why it was not a maid who was looking after her, but a simple girl. Finally, the maid, with a trembling voice, was able to say that her name was Marie, and that she was here on the nanny's orders, and she was sent to the mistress for her misdeed. Marie was lucky, because just yesterday, the owner would not have listened to any excuses. The maid could not answer her mistress's question as to why the nanny had sent her here. Viana told her to leave. She didn't want Marie to serve her like that, but it sounded like she was rejecting her because of her low status. But that wasn't quite true. Viana told the maid to drink some water to calm her hiccups, as she looked like she was about to faint. She told her to lean forward and drink water from the opposite side of the cup, so the hiccups would go away. But the hiccups never did. And Viana ordered Marie to go out and call another maid. When she ran out of the room, the girl suddenly thought about what yesterday's mistress would do to her. But the nanny knew Viana's character very well, and it was strange that she sent such an inexperienced girl. Most likely, the matter was so urgent that she didn't even notice that Marie was an ordinary maid. When the new maid arrived, the mistress asked where the nanny herself was, and she replied that she was in the mistress's chambers. This was very strange, because she rarely went to the marquise openly. Old Viana would certainly have taken her anger out on the servants. After all, the nanny was the only one who cared for her, and the girl's former selfishness did not allow her to tolerate the thought that the nanny put the marquise above herself. But now, it all seemed like some kind of childish farce. The maids tried to stop Viana, but she stubbornly continued on. Approaching the door of one of the rooms, the girl demanded that it be opened. Knowing in advance what a miserable future awaited her, Viana had to live right and change her fate. The girl was very determined. It would never have occurred to her before, but now she realized that she needed to see the marquise, and she pushed the door hard with her foot. At that moment, the marquise, the marchioness, and the nanny were in the room. Despite their displeased looks, the girl entered the room. At this moment, the marquise was about to leave. The marquise was extremely unhappy about this, but the nanny managed to hold her by the shoulders. Viana noticed that as he left, the marquise didn't even turn around to look at his wife. Now that the girl took a closer look, it turned out that the marquise was eerily similar to Viana in her last moments. Peaceful, full of hatred for the world. The only daughter of a wealthy count's family, at the age of 18, she married the Marquis of Eliant, and thereby acquired the title of Marquise. For years she chased him, trying to win his love, and it became such a big story that the whole of high society was discussing it. She spared no expense or connections to win his attention, but the Marquis was colder than an iceberg. He avoided even the slightest touch to her. No one understood why he married her. There were rumors that it was only because of her substantial dowry. Over the years, her melancholy only grew stronger. In desperation, she even tried to give birth to an heir, ruining her health. But in the end, a daughter, even a biological one, had no value if she could not inherit the title. The Marquise blamed her daughter for everything, suggesting that if you had been born a boy, everything would have been different. But Viana understood that it would not have changed anything, because the Marquise did not pay attention, not because she was a girl. He simply did not care about either of them. But it was useless to explain anything to my mother. She was too lost in her own delusions. But she continued to scream and blame her daughter for everything. She wished her death. The maid tried to calm the enraged Marquise, but she was able to push her away and break free. She really wanted to finish off Viana, but the girl understood everything in time and was able to escape. After all, she realized that she couldn't cope with the crazy woman one-on-one. Viana asked security to lock the door so her mother couldn't leave, and she closed the door to the room with the sword. The Marquise began to scratch the door from the inside with her nails. Viana could not remember the Marquise behaving so madly. She wished everyone good luck and moved away from the Marquise. The servants rushed after her. In her entire life, Viana had never seen the Marquise enter the Marquise's chambers. He even posted knights at his doors to prevent her from breaking into his chambers or office without permission. At that time, it was completely unclear how Viana came into being, because she had the features of the Marquise, but not a single one of his features. The thought flashed through her head, whether she was even his daughter. But the Marquise was obsessed with him and was unlikely to cheat on him, and the girl decided to ask the Marquis about it directly. Vian didn't care whether she was his daughter or not. She had already screwed up once anyway and had nothing to lose. On the way to her father's office, she was met by security. Without paying much attention to the knights, she opened the doors. Marquis Eliant was there with his servant. But when she appeared, he didn't even bat an eyelid. He was as cold as always. The servant offered her tea, but Viana refused. She approached her father's desk and asked him directly if she was his daughter. Eliant raised his eyes to her and asked what the question was about. But she wanted to know the answer to this very question. The Marquis asked the girl not to waste his time. She explained that, for her, personally, it didn't matter. But if she was going to reach the top, such little things could become a problem. Eliant asked his daughter if she was really aiming to become empress. But when she answered in the affirmative, he said that she was wasting her time on nonsense. But Viana knew for sure that rumors of blood relationship were like a dagger that could plunge into the back at any moment. When she became empress, these rumors hung over her like a guillotine, and the Marquis never once refuted them. His silence held back the wolves, but in high society she was torn to pieces, as if slashed by invisible blades. Therefore, now more than ever, she needed to know the truth, because the girl was not so stupid as to jump into the fire with a bundle of brushwood in her hands. Viana demanded that her father answer the question of whether she was truly the legitimate daughter of the House of Eliant. But this question wasn't even worth an answer. And now everything became clear to the girl. The Marquis was not at all wet. He was always honest in this matter. He never doubted for a moment that Viana was his daughter. He just didn't need to prove anything to her or to this world. The Marquis had always been a man of few words and restraint, and the girl, like everyone else, had created her own doubts and interpreted everything as she wished. It turned out that all this time, she was tormented by illusions born of her own inferiority complex. Her father warned her that if she was going to continue talking nonsense, she had better leave. Viana smiled, because now, without a shadow of a doubt, it was clear that she was his daughter. Apparently, these thoughts made her laugh too loudly, and her father didn't like it. It turns out he did have feelings after all. The girl remembered her father's question about whether she really wanted to become empress. But it was unlikely that there was a single unmarried woman in the empire who did not dream of this title. Viana also dreamed of the crown, dreamed of standing next to him with pride in her chest. She believed that once she got the throne, they would live happily, like in a fairy tale. But she already knew in advance about her unhappy future, and did not know whether she really wanted to achieve this goal, and whether she should obediently follow fate, as if everything had already been decided. Her father asked her if she wanted the same as the other women of the empire. Viana was sure that she wanted power, but this throne was not a toy. It was a web of blood, lies, and thousands of threads of other people's interests. In other words, even if she refused, she could not avoid it. But suddenly, someone entered the Marquise's office. It was the butler, and he looked like he had lost his composure. He apologized to the Marquise for this, but began to say something about the lady. And now Viana remembered, because this was not the first time she saw the butler like this. That day, everything was exactly like today. When the girl woke up, her nanny was not there. But hearing that she had been urgently called to the Marquise, Viana flew into a rage. She then dismissed the maid as she stuttered and tried to explain the situation, throwing everything she could get her hands on at her. And then no one dared to stop her. Only later, after a long time, the butler arrived, just as confused as he was now. His movements, always calm, were then abrupt and hasty, and he, just as now, could not utter a word. After all, Viana knew what he was going to tell the Marquise. The butler came to inform that the lady had died. It was a beautiful, clear day outside, and looking at the sky, the girl thought that such weather was too good for a funeral. According to tradition, the Marquise's body was to be cremated and placed in the Eliant family crypt. The ceremony is held after everyone has left the funeral site. Only immediate relatives can attend. Until the body was consigned to the flames, it was possible to say goodbye to it. No one could get it into their heads that the Marquise had died. Everyone who came to say goodbye wanted to know the reason for such a sudden death. The Marquise did not report anything about her illness, which meant the reason was something else, and everyone was very curious about this reason. Many were interested in how such a beautiful woman was prepared for the funeral ceremony, and they couldn't wait to see her. Vian found such talk vulgar, since for them, funerals were akin to a spectacle. The girl was curious how many of those at the ceremony were sincerely grieving, and she looked at her father. The Marquis, holding a yellow flower in his hand, approached the coffin, and those gathered decided that they would now open it, and everyone would see what the Marquis looked like now. But he only silently placed the flower on the coffin lid. Those gathered felt that breaking the funeral tradition would deprive the Marquise of her final honors. But the Marquis left without saying a prayer or a farewell word. Just as these people did not understand his behavior, Viana had once been wrong about him. Lady Eliant heard every word that was said behind her back. Last time she didn't know anything and couldn't stand her father's coldness, the whispers behind her back, and the looks full of pity. Then, in a rage, Viana ran out of the funeral hall, and the Marquise did not even try to stop her. But if she left now, he would have behaved in exactly the same way. But now she understood his motives and had no desire to make a scene. The Marquise committed suicide while the maids were distracted. She threw herself out of the window of her room on the 3rd floor. At almost all funerals, the body is laid out for viewing, the only exceptions being those where death was caused by a contagious disease, or if the body was so dehydrated that it was impossible to view it. But even in this case, people are warned in advance. But in this empire, suicide was taboo. Such people were not accompanied on their final journey, and no prayers were offered for their repose. The Marquis had placed a gag order on the matter, so no one would know the true cause of death. Not even Viana knew until her nanny accidentally let it slip, and all official records would list it as death from illness. Like the Marquise, Vian had to show due respect, despite the fact that the Marquise was not pure in the eyes of other people, and was not a worthy mother. Suddenly, a tall man whom she did not know appeared behind the girl. It was the magnate, Count Pisson. He was Viana's maternal grandfather, but the girl had completely forgotten about him. He brought yellow flowers and fell to the lid of the coffin. It was very difficult for him to let go of the daughter whom he had raised and cherished so much. Just looking at him made Viana's heart clench. The Count began to rise from his knees and staggered, and he couldn't stay on his feet and began to fall. But an unknown young man managed to catch him, and judging by how friendly the Count is towards him, he is dear to him. The young man cast a look of hostility at Viana, and the girl didn't even know the reason for this. She was so happy that she even thought that maybe she was imagining it, But then she began to look at him with the same look. The girl thought that he would say something to her in response, but he left silently, and the fact that such a trifle upset her made Vian even feel awkward. But this man's face seemed very familiar to the girl. The Marquise's funeral lasted 3 days, and on the last day, in the crematorium, where only immediate family members were allowed, it was time to cremate her body. Once upon a time, Viana longed for her love. She pretended to be obedient and even tried to adopt boyish habits, but this only angered her mother. She was only interested in the Marquise's attention. Perhaps if his daughter had been even a little bit like him, the Marquise would have treated her a little better. Now that the Marquise has become a widower, they will begin to persistently ask him for brides, because his only child is a daughter who is unable to inherit the title. But then Viana remembered that until her death, the Marquise never married again. Perhaps the Marquise was closer to him than everyone thought. That is why Vian wanted to console herself with the thought that the one she loved did not hate her. The father handed the girl a vessel with ashes, and then he cut off a small lock of his hair. Then he did the same with his daughter's hair. This was the last rite. A lock of hair from the closest blood relative was placed into the vessel with ashes. It was a symbol that the connection is not broken, even after death. To complete the tradition, another lock of Count Pissan's hair was needed, but now he was too shocked for that. At that moment, a woman appeared in the room. She was not part of the immediate family, and had therefore been waiting outside the door all this time. But, according to her, she was very afraid of being late. Looking at her, Viana remembered this woman, although she had only seen her a few times. It was Countess Pissan, the Count's second wife, and therefore formally Vian's maternal grandmother. But she never considered her as such. It was the first time the girl had seen the Countess so close, because the last time she had run away from the funeral on the very first day, so they had not had the chance to meet. Moreover, she was from a common class, and there was no blood relation between them, so there was no reason for communication. The Countess brought with her a bag containing a lock of Count Pissan's hair. She was afraid that he would be upset if she asked him about it, so she allowed herself this tactlessness. The Marquis sincerely thanked the Countess for this. Viana was about to follow her father, but the Countess called out to her, and she asked if she would like to visit the Count, because he really wanted to see her. The Count was almost never in the capital, and after the Marquise fell ill, he did not appear at all. Viana was his only blood relative, so that's why he wanted to meet her. Last time, shortly after the death of the Marquise, the Count also died, unable to survive the shock. Although Vianney received part of the inheritance, the main fortune went to Countess Pissan, so huge that people began to whisper that she killed the Count for money. Day after day, the nanny insisted that the young lady accuse the Countess, and without really thinking about it, she easily testified against the Countess. And because of this, the Countess had a miscarriage right during the interrogation, and the loss of that child was entirely the girl's fault. Viana told the Countess that now she was apparently not the only blood relative, and this offended her. Although it was not like Viana, she sincerely hoped that the child in the Countess's womb would survive. But she pointed out that the young lady was still the Count's only blood relative. Pointing to her belly, the young lady asked if this child was the Count's. Countess Pissan cried out that she was going beyond all bounds. Viana began to remember that the Count would die in 2 months, and the Countess would lose her child during the investigation, which meant that she didn't yet know she was pregnant. The young lady continued to say that the Countess's excessive worries could harm the child, and to save the life of this child, she must take care of herself, and the Count should also be told about this. These words made the Countess very angry, and she reminded Vian that he was not a Count to her, but a grandfather. It turned out that she was angry because of the way the girl called the Count, but Viana explained that how she addresses people is her own business. Now, Viana's family were just strangers, because when she died as Viana, her mother and father were everything to her. She lived for their attention. But after living Lija's life and experiencing true parental love, she realized that blood kinship does not necessarily mean soul kinship. At this point, the young lady asked to end the conversation and went to the carriage. But the Countess continued to say that it was her mother's father and asked why she did not want to see him. But Viana did not answer and silently got into the carriage. At this time, a real spectacle took place in the Marquise's house. The girl's nanny created a valuable drama and cried as if the end of the world had come. Passing by her, Viana told her to stop crying, because in this state she could get sick herself. This all crossed all boundaries. Viana sat down on the sofa and closed her eyes. She thought to herself that if someone were to pass by now, they might think that they were mourning a corpse. The young lady was already beginning to fall asleep, but suddenly she heard a noise at the door. The countess was at the threshold of the room, but the nanny would not let her in, saying that the mistress did not wish to see her. But the countess continued to insist that she had every right to see the young lady, like her maternal grandmother. But the nanny did not calm down and did not let her go. Viana came to the door and asked what was going on. But the nanny replied that it was nothing important and that the lady should rest. Turning to Countess Viana, she noted that they often met today. She invited her to come in, but the nanny flared up, calling the countess special. Glancing at the nanny, Viana asked what she should understand by her words. Last time, Viana was empress for 8 long years, and in order to maintain dignity on the throne, she learned to humble those who contradicted her. This side of the lady was new to the nanny, so she was shocked, and if she didn't want to calm down, then it would be better for her to leave. Viana called 2 maids and ordered them to take the nanny out of the room, and she threatened them that otherwise they would also be dragged out by force. They did not dare to disobey the young lady. Viana invited the countess into the room. They sat down at the table with a cup of tea. The girl understood that the guest had come for a reason. The countess noted that the young lady was not really what they said about her. She asked what she would do if she accused her nanny of insulting the nobility. Viana understood that the countess would not back down. She asked the young lady to see her grandfather. Viana hadn't imagined that she was acting as a nanny against her, but now it was difficult to refuse. The count was in the guest wing. He lost consciousness during the funeral ceremony and woke up recently. And when he woke up, the first thing he asked was whether Viana was there. Seeing his granddaughter at the threshold of the room, he was very happy. The count asked her to come closer. Seeing him like this, the girl became convinced that the countess had not killed the count, and she had not needed to. There was no hint of lust for life in his eyes. Grandpa asked if she was okay, but she had no reason to be unwell. They were never close to the marquise, and Viana did nothing but hate her. The girl, like her mother, destroyed herself for the sake of love. That was all her indulgence. They were both blinded and did stupid things. The count embraced the young lady and pressed her to himself. Tears began to flow from his eyes. He blamed himself for turning away from them. He asked his granddaughter not to cry so bitterly, and Viana herself did not notice how tears began to flow down her face. The count promised to return soon. He asked her to remember that Viana was not alone, and that his departure was only a temporary measure, and all for her sake. A few days after the count's departure, the nanny helped the young lady choose a dress. This restless nanny really exhausted the girl. However, she raised her and Viana could not completely ignore her. The nanny insisted that a visit to the imperial palace required much more preparation than she thought. While other young ladies received an invitation to the palace only after their coming-of-age ceremony, Viana was given this honor at such a young age. But all these dresses looked very tasteless. Of all of them, only one seemed worthy for such an occasion. It was a sky blue dress. This color suited Viana very well, and the nanny asked her to try on this dress. Its hue was as pure as the sky itself. But Viana categorically refused to wear this outfit and ordered that another one be found. Sky blue, once a favorite color, has now become hated. This drove the girl crazy. After she burst into tears in front of the count, it became more difficult for her to control her emotions. If she was already in such a state just thinking about the meeting, then Viana was afraid to think what would happen when they saw each other. Perhaps she will fall in love with him again so recklessly that she will not be able to resist this feeling. The nanny asked if the girl was really feeling well. There wasn't much time left, and I still had to do my hair, put on my makeup, and try on the dress. Viana looked stunning in this outfit. Once upon a time, she herself considered herself the most beautiful in the world. But now she considered herself not just ugly, but certainly not the best in the empire. Viana knew the one who was truly called the Imperial Rose. She had bright, clean sky blue hair. It was a beautiful and beloved pearl of the empire. The official reason for the invitation to the imperial palace was the emperor's condolences on the occasion of the marquise's death. But those who knew more understood that the reason was quite different. The emperor had an empress, two favorites, and an endless number of concubines, and more than 10 children from them. And of the 6 sons, 2 were the main contenders for the throne. The first prince, son of the first imperial mistress, and the 6th prince, son of the late former empress, born more than 10 years ago. The 6th prince was declared heir at birth and was left motherless that same year. The new empress was chosen from an impoverished baronial family, but she was never able to create a new power structure, and all the nobility supported the first prince, the son of the eldest favorite. He was 16 years older than the heir, which put the latter at a distinct disadvantage, but the emperor placed his bets on the younger heir, the one he had chosen. And the first step in this game was Viana. Marquise Eliane, who had maintained neutrality for generations, was a welcome ally for both the nobility and the emperor. But neither the nobility nor the emperor himself could influence her. So the emperor turned his attention to the young woman. The visit to the palace was not just a formality. The emperor needed a pretext to bring her there, and the death of the marquise became the perfect cover. No one could fail to understand the hint when the imperial carriage, the one only permitted to be used by members of the imperial family or those personally approved by the emperor, was sent for Viana. The girl again found herself in the wheels of fate. She was afraid not of meeting him, but of how she would change when she saw him. She might be overwhelmed by the all-consuming love that Viana felt for him, and she might not keep her composure. In the carriage, her father asked her if she, like the others, wanted to become an empress, but the girl did not even expect him to speak to her, because in her first life, at that moment, he did not say a word. But Viana was sure that her wishes meant nothing, but her father convinced her otherwise, saying that otherwise he would not have asked her. She became curious about why her father cared about her opinion, since he never did that. He replied that the reason was that it concerned her. This change was incomprehensible, since it had also affected her last time. Even when she became crown princess and then empress, her father never asked her about such things. And then Viana asked the question, what will happen if she doesn't want this? She didn't believe that, without her desire, all this could be stopped. The emperor had most likely already decided that she would inherit the title, and unless something extraordinary happened, Viana would inevitably become it. He chose her not because of love, but because of the influence that stood behind her. And it didn't matter what she wanted. The emperor simply didn't have a more suitable match for the crown prince, and he couldn't refuse such a profitable alliance. The marquis told his daughter that even if Viana did not want to become empress, it was difficult to avoid it. At this time they arrived at the palace. Father was the first to get out of the carriage, and when he offered her his hand, he added that, although it was difficult, it was not at all impossible. Viana asked what his words meant. Could this mean that they would fulfill her wishes, or was there another meaning hidden in it? The girl couldn't understand what was on their minds. The emperor was informed of the arrival of Marquis Eliane, and he ordered them to be admitted. Viana found herself in this place again, within these walls of the imperial palace and the throne room, where destinies were decided. Soon she should see him for the first time in this life. Together with their father, they greeted the son of the empire. The emperor laughed merrily and spoke about the daughter of the great chancellor. Viana wondered if the emperor had been as cheerful last time, but then he had only smiled faintly, watching her awkward greeting. He asked the marquis why he had kept such a pearl hidden until now, and he called the young lady closer to him. She glanced at her father and silently walked forward. The emperor asked her how old she was, and she quietly replied that she would soon be 11. He smiled and laughed sincerely, saying that it was simply wonderful. It seemed to Viana that this time the emperor was happier than last time, and suddenly they announced that the crown prince had arrived. His Highness asked him to come in immediately. Viana didn't know if she could look at him calmly or if she would fall in love again so deeply that she would lose herself. At that moment, the crown prince appeared in the throne room. He looked a little younger than in Viana's memories. Now he was only 14 years old, but already now, that unearthly beauty that had once driven her crazy was noticeable in him. The eldest daughter of House Eliant, Viana Asa Eliant, greeted the future son of the empire. The emperor asked the crown prince to come closer. He was very pleased with what he saw. As expected, together they looked like a perfect couple. He asked the chancellor's opinion, but he remained silent, and the chamberlain considered them a pair of heavenly birds. Suddenly, the emperor was informed that the council was about to begin. He glanced at the chamberlain and said that he would be sorry if the young lady left so quickly. And he responded by saying that reishi roses were blooming in the garden of the wizard's palace, and that it would be a wonderful idea to show them to the young lady. Now it became clear that these two had planned everything. According to the emperor, it would be more convenient for the young lady to wait for the chancellor in the garden than to return alone. Viana could not disobey the emperor, for behind these words there was an order. The prince was to accompany her while the chancellor was busy, and he extended his hand to the young lady. Everything was the same as then. The only difference was that then she couldn't stop shaking with excitement, but now she was shaking with fear of what might happen again. They walked with the prince in the garden of the wizard's palace, which was also called the Palace of the Crown Princess. Everything was the same then as it is now. The sky was clear and bright, and there was not a breath of wind, as if fate itself was holding its breath. And suddenly, a sharp gust of wind, the snow-white petals swirling in the air, and the prince's silver hair were a perfect match. And at that very moment, Viana fell in love, terribly and irrevocably. Sirius Eisenlow Priston was the crown prince of the Priston Empire and future emperor. Even after going through death, the girl could not forget him, because he was the one for whom she rejected everything, even her fate. Now, looking back, she realized that he had never hated her. He was not overtly tender, but he was not indifferent like the Marquise. He observed due politeness with Fiona, and she took this as a manifestation of warm feelings. At that time, she didn't yet know what true love was. Not understanding the difference between politeness and feelings, she mistook his attitude for something more. But she felt this difference when he met the one he truly loved. The way he treated her was so different from the way he treated everyone else. If Viana had let the prince go as soon as she realized this bitter truth, perhaps everything would have turned out differently, but she refused to admit it and took out all her resentment on her rival. The girl tried to remember when exactly the prince, who at least treated her with the politeness befitting a husband, despite his lack of feelings, began to despise her. She looked for the reason in her rival, thinking that he changed because of her. At the time, Viana didn't want to admit it, but now she realized that it had happened long before they met. The prince already looked at her with contempt. The nanny happily reported that flowers had been sent from the imperial palace again. She thought that the prince had fallen in love with the young lady, but this was not at all the case, because such a gift could not be a sign of simple attention. The reishi flower symbolized the crown princess, and the prince probably didn't even know anything about this gift. It was not a gift, but a warning from the emperor that the Marquis Eliant's eldest daughter was already taken. Vaillant had the right of inheritance in both the house of the Marquis Eliant and the house of Count Pisson, and was a profitable match for any young aristocrat. But in his past life at this time, the count had already appointed an heir. It would have been good to know who he was, but at that time the girl was too infatuated with the prince. Still, she was glad that their meeting had gone more smoothly than expected. Even when Viana's heart trembled, it was thanks to Ligia's consciousness that kept her from losing her head. But this could not continue any longer. The girl's thoughts again returned to the crown prince, so she decided to go out for a short walk. When she went outside, she saw that the marquise really didn't care about anything except her husband, because instead of a garden, the courtyard was a real jungle. But this silence was also charming in its own way. Even if this place had been abandoned, it was unlikely that wild animals would have settled here, so the young lady decided to take a walk and enjoy the silence. But suddenly, she heard some rustling in the bushes nearby. Viana understood that it was unlikely to be, for example, a bear, since she was not on the estate's territory. Most likely, it was a small animal, but she had to check. Carefully, so as not to prick herself on the thorns, the girl parted the dense thickets, and in the depths of the bushes, she saw something black. Thinking it was a black cat, she wanted to help him, because she had always been very gentle with animals. Having caught this little animal, she took a closer look at it. But it turned out to be a child, a small, frightened boy. Viana looked at her find in silence, and then I decided that he was even funny. Suddenly, she heard that a servant had come into the garden and was looking for this boy. They really didn't want him to run into Vienna. Standing up from behind the bushes, she firmly asked what was going on here. The maids were very scared, but the mistress asked them not to make her repeat her question twice. Since the marquise has died, she is now the mistress of this house and garden too, and the servants came here without permission and did not answer questions, The mistress could regard this as disobedience. The maids began to justify themselves and ask for forgiveness. But even without their excuses, it was clear that they were looking for this boy. Viana sent the servants away and warned them that they should prepare for punishment. Now she had to decide what to do with the child. It was Lant Baron Eliant. The Marquis brought him into the house shortly after the death of the Marquise. When Viana found out that he had settled with them, it was no longer news to anyone. The nanny cried loudly for several days, repeating about the Marquise's misfortune. The young lady hated him, and her pride in being her father's only child instantly crumbled to dust. And the worst thing was that Lant was an exact copy of his father, unlike Viana. While the Marquise and she were being pushed into the shadows, some strange puppy languidly entered their lives. Until the very moment Viana got to the palace, she turned the boy's life into a real hell. She encouraged her maids to spoil his food, and if he didn't please her in any way, she found a reason to beat him black and blue. But no one tried to stop her. On the contrary, people deliberately bullied Lant in order to curry favor with her. Lant never resisted. Even when he was flogged with sticks, he did not make a sound. And in this small, silent child, Viana saw the Marquise, that same cold, unfeeling man who did not even blink, no matter how much she waited for his warmth. Instead of taking her anger out on the Marquis, she took it out on Lant, even though the Marquis was the only one who could have stopped her. But he also didn't lift a finger, so Lant could only endure every second of this nightmare. Looking back now, it seemed strange, because Lant was the only heir of the Eliant family, but the Marquise never spoke of passing on the title. But there was no one else to continue the line. The Eliants always had problems with offspring. It was said that the Marquis had a younger brother, but he died long ago. If this was true, the Marquis should have recognized Lant as his heir and put an end to this abuse. But instead, he hid him in an outbuilding and gave him only the most basic education due to a nobleman. But this time, Viana hadn't started to torment him yet. She used to hate Lant, but now she couldn't say it for sure. Perhaps he reminded her of the dog she had when she was Ligia, and she wanted to tame him. Viana reminded the boy that he had been told to stay away from her, but there was no reaction. First, he needed to treat his wounds, but Viana couldn't take the boys into her room because the nanny was there. There was only one place left then, and she extended her hand to the boy, and he rose and followed the young lady. Lant was 4 years younger, and the last time Viana saw him, he was already quite tall, even taller than the Marquise, with broad shoulders and a strong build. He was certainly a hit with the girls. No one would have thought that this boy would grow up like this. The maids continued to look for him. Viana didn't understand why he avoided them like the plague, since she hadn't started teasing him yet, and the maids treated him like an unwanted stepson. If he had been a bully or a complete loser, she would have understood. But he was quiet and obedient. There was definitely something fishy going on here. Although the heads of this house seemed to not care what was going on under their roof, so the butler and nanny ran everything. All the maids were under the supervision of the nanny, and it was necessary to quickly figure out what was going on here. Viana knocked on the butler's door. She walked into him with a boy who was holding her hand. The butler was extremely surprised, because he did not expect to see them here. The young lady asked to bring her some medicine. At this time, the Marquis was also in the office. There were marks from something sharp on the boy's hands, and his cheek was swollen as if he had been hit. The Marquis approached them. Viana had to say that she did it. She told the story that she simply squeezed him a little, but the boy's skin turned out to be too soft. The young lady asked the butler to make sure that everything healed as it should. She got up from the sofa and asked the butler to bring her the cake to her room as soon as he finished. The girl was already approaching the door and, turning around, told Lant that he was coming with her. This surprised the boy very much. There were very tasty sweets on his table. Viana allowed him to eat them, and he began to eat greedily. The maids whispered that he was a country bumpkin, and it was immediately obvious where he came from. Viana could do whatever she wanted to him, but it was unbearable to watch when others were bullying him. The girl kicked out the maids, but they again did not carry out her order the first time. For this, Viana threatened to explain everything by force. The girl exhaled to calm herself, but the boy was trembling even from this sigh. Apparently someone was intimidating him. All this complicated the situation, because she had no intention of getting close to anyone. Although one child would not have changed much, Viana suggested that Lant punish the servants, but he shook his head. But if someone did something bad, then he must be punished. Lant began to cry, saying that being punished hurt. But since he was against it, Fiona promised to leave them alone. She needed to get things in order here as soon as possible. But first she had to take care of her boy. He was the first thing that truly belonged to her in this place. Fiona came to talk to her father. In this life, she didn't want to let Lant turn into the same emotionless ice as he was. The girl told her father that she needed teachers. The butler was puzzled, because the young lady already had many tutors in etiquette, manners, as well as history, mathematics, theology, and so on. But she did not need these. She wanted to get the best teachers in every field. They were needed for Lant's training. She also asked to fire all her current teachers, because she already knew everything they taught. Fiona really hoped that her father would approve of her request. When she was about to leave the office, her father asked the reason for such a request, and why did she show interest in this child? To which the girl replied, because he was hers. She couldn't stand it if someone despised her puppy. Fiona wanted to make the best of him. That's why she asked her father to help her with this. Now he is just a puppy, but one day he will become a formidable beast that no one will dare to humiliate, and the Elliot family will be his wings. Fiona looked forward to these days. When the girl was about to leave, she discovered a maid behind the door. She acted very wary, as if she was eavesdropping. The young lady ordered Lance's room to be moved from the outbuilding to the main building. Due to the nanny's intervention, she found herself a bit far from Fiona's room, but for now she was willing to put up with it. She couldn't fall asleep. Thoughts were spinning around in her head. The girl couldn't stand it and decided to go check if Lant was sleeping. Looking into the nanny's room, she discovered that she was not there. Fiona realized that she had to hurry to Lant. Approaching the door of his room, she saw this picture. All the maids stood around the boy's bed and did not let him sleep. And the nanny said that he shouldn't have crossed the threshold of this house, and also create problems for their young lady. Fiona was extremely unhappy about this. The nanny tried to justify herself, but the girl heard everything herself. The young lady called the butler, and she said that she witnessed Lant being bullied. She called the servants the real criminals. The nanny, in a fit of anger, asked the girl if she knew why her mother died, and that this degenerate should be torn to pieces. At that moment, the Marquis appeared behind the girl. Now, it wasn't only Fiona who knew about the nanny's actions. From that night onwards, a real commotion began in the mansion. From the maid's testimony, it became clear that the nanny was behind everything that happened, but the girl could not bear the thought of being punished. Although she committed the unforgivable, it was she who raised Fiona as her own child. The young lady personally asked the Marquis to let her go, and he simply dismissed the nanny from her duties. Finally, she told the girl that she would regret this day, and without looking back, she disappeared. After this, Fiona selected new, reliable people, and again distributed responsibilities. And for a while, everything calmed down, and nothing more was heard about the nanny. One day over tea, Lant asked if he really only brought trouble to his sister, but she asked him not to think about such nonsense. Having listened to the servants' conversations, the boy said that since he appeared in Fiona's house, things had become difficult, but she asked him not to listen to empty talk and promised to do everything so that he would never feel out of place in this house. The young lady asked him to remember only one thing, that his sister was the sky. He didn't need to know anything else. Fiona's slightly altered childhood had no effect on the past. The key events remained the same. As in her previous life, she was betrothed to the crown prince on the day of his coming of age, but the girl was still too young, so the first prince's supporters objected, so the wedding was postponed. But Fiona was confident that if everything went as before, she would become crown princess at the age of 16. Last time, the emperor did not hesitate, and as soon as the girl reached the required age, they immediately arranged an engagement. The young lady needed a plan, otherwise everything would repeat itself like last time. The prince approached Fiona and asked how she was feeling. This man was kind to everyone. He decided to call the court physician just in case. But the young lady stopped him. She said she was fine and didn't need to see a doctor. It was just a little dizzy. The prince asked if she was sure about this. Fiona smiled and apologized for alarming His Majesty. The moments when two young people met were always difficult. The emperor arranged tea parties for them, hoping that these meetings would help them begin to develop feelings for each other. But the problem was in the prince himself. Before, he considered the girl unbearable. Now he was at least starting to worry. perhaps because she had stopped pestering him, but Viana still wasn't going to marry him. The girl reminded the prince that 2.5 years had already passed since their engagement. When Viana started this conversation, the prince thought that he had made a mistake somewhere, but the young lady reassured him, saying that he treated her with respect as his bride. And then the prince realized that perhaps she was simply uncomfortable with his presence. He waited for an answer from Viana. The prince asked if she felt uncomfortable around him. The girl asked whether their meetings would stop if she answered positively, but he only grinned in response because she was his bride. Viana reminded that the engagement can be broken. The prince asked if she understood what this meant. She understood this perfectly well, and once again expressed her desire to break off the engagement. And the reason was that the girl was indifferent to the prince. In response, the prince laughed loudly. He found her an interesting person who knew how to surprise, but Viana was not joking. The prince could not understand whether she was really so naive or pretending. After all, among the nobility and royal families, rarely did anyone marry for love. Marriage was a union of two houses, through strengthening common interests. But for Viana, this path led to tragedy. Life was short, and she did not want to waste it. She dreamed of meeting her beloved and living happily with him for 100 years. Li Jia experienced this joy, but the past Viana did not. And Viana didn't necessarily have to be next to the prince. The engagement was conditional, and if a more suitable lady could be found, it would be even more advantageous for the prince. But the prince said that there was simply no more suitable lady than her. The girl asked him if he was sure about this. She decided to do everything to prevent this wedding, and Viana offered to help the prince find a suitable lady. The prince suggested that, hypothetically, there was someone better than his bride. To this, the young lady replied that she must give up her seat. But they were already engaged, and Viana was officially the prince's bride. And he suggested to the girl to solve everything in a simpler way. She just needed to fall in love with the prince. And the groom intended to kiss the girl. But in response, I almost got a slap in the face. It was the hunting instinct to pursue fleeing prey, and the prince was a very skilled hunter. So the bride shouldn't have provoked him. As she sat in the carriage, Viana thought that the prince had gone completely crazy. Although if he had agreed to break off the engagement without hesitation, it would have been even more surprising. It's just that he hadn't met the one yet, and the conditions that Viana offered were beneficial to him. But the prince's reaction was unexpected. He looked at the girl like a bird of prey at its target, although Viana could give way to her rival a little later, when the prince meets her and falls in love, and to meet the one she loves and live happily. But this won't work, because not only hunters knew how to hunt. Viana returned to her castle. The first thing she did was ask the servants where Lant was. He was on the training field, and the girl decided to go to him. She was worried when she learned that a retired knight had been appointed as his mentor. But he was truly one of the 10 best in the entire empire, and his teaching methods were impeccable. Viana knew little about fencing, but judging by how long Lant held out against such an opponent, he was truly talented. At the end of the battle, the opponents bowed to each other, and then Lant saw his sister and was very happy to see her. Viana was also glad to see him and was very proud of him. She thanked Sir Tilt for the lesson. Lant asked what brought his sister to the training field, but she reminded that she asked not to call her sister. The guy didn't forget, because his sister is his sky. He saw that Viana was out of sorts and asked what had happened in the palace. The girl said that she was bitten by a rabid dog, and a rather large one. Lant was surprised where such dogs came from in the palace. Viana snuggled close to her brother. He smelled of sweat, but to her it was the scent of warm sunshine. She felt very calm at home and really wanted this peace to remain undisturbed for as long as possible. But suddenly, one of the servants came running. He brought the news that Count Passan was dying. The Count returned exactly 2 months after that day. It was the same day when he was able to do it last time. He moved into the residence to be closer to the Eliant's home and to see his granddaughter, as if trying to make up for everything he had missed by devoting all his time to her. But perhaps the death of the Marquise had such an effect on him. But the Count's body remained weak. Those around him were constantly preparing to say goodbye to him, and apparently this day had come. The Marquis arrived at the residence with Fiona. The Count's little daughter stood near the door to his room. When she saw Viana, she was immediately happy to see her. Milady called the girl to her, because she shouldn't wander alone. Viana didn't know whether it was worth going to the Count now, because even if little Elle had poor eyesight, she didn't need to see something like this. At that moment, a man came out of the door of the room. It was Evan Lee Passon. He was the Count's heir. Information about him was shrouded in mystery, and no one could reveal it. No one knew what country he was from, or who his parents were. The members of the Count's family treated him with suspicion and fiercely opposed his inheritance of the title. But he eventually became the successor to Count Passon, and from then on, the Count's trading company entered a golden age. The noble ladies vied with each other to boast of the things they had bought in the company of this noble family. Viana had heard that they sold women's goods, but she hadn't expected such an image. He was tall, with a harmonious build, and his expressive features made him look more like a knight than a merchant. Hearing this voice, Elle immediately recognized it. Taking the girl in his arms, he realized that she had run away from the nanny again. Usually, Elle was shy with strangers, but she rushed to him without hesitation. Apparently, they saw each other often. The girl whispered to him that she missed her dad very much. Evan explained to the girl that her dad also misses her very much, but he is sick now, so they need to wait a little before meeting. While Evan distracted the girl, the Marquise and Viana went into the room. The Count was lying on the bed, and the Countess was next to him. Seeing his granddaughter, he extended his hand to her with the last of his strength. This wasn't the first time the girl had to say goodbye to someone. She had experienced this countless times when she was Ligia. But for some reason, the pain didn't diminish each time. The Count thanked Viana for coming, and he wished her to be happy. The next moment, the Count's hand began to fall lifelessly. Viana was the last one he managed to say goodbye to. The Countess asked her husband to wake up, but it was no longer possible, and the inconsolable widow cried on his chest. Her grandfather was the first person from whom Viana felt family love. Realizing who she was, his kindness and care broke down even the strong walls that she had erected within herself. Viana knew he would be gone soon. He lived 4 years longer than expected. Although she had enough time to prepare for this moment, one cannot be prepared for something like this. And the girl began to lose consciousness. The father managed to catch her and hugged her. And suddenly, the Marquis said that he would stay with her until her tears dried. His unexpected behavior confused the girl. She wanted to stop crying and break free from his embrace, but against her will, the tears continued to flow for a very long time. After the funeral, not everyone was happy with the division of the inheritance. Relatives were against giving the trading company to Evan, although these people themselves did not even show up at the funeral. Viana realized that things were worse than she had expected, but she asked everyone to calm down. The Count's inheritance was divided between 4 main claimants, with the Countess and his daughter, Elle, receiving a mansion, land, and enough money to live in luxury for the rest of their days. Viana received a small plot of land, some money and jewelry, and the most important title was given to Elle's future husband. But what shocked everyone was that both guardianship of Elle and the key trading company passed to Evan. But Viana was surprised by something else. In the securities, he was listed as Evan Lee, not Evan Lee Passon, and one of the older family members could have taken custody of the girl. Everyone was waiting to hear what the Countess would say, but she answered unequivocally that she trusted this man. The family was shocked that she trusted a stranger more than them. They began to shout that taking a woman of unknown descent as a wife was the first mistake, and that Ariel might not even be the Count's daughter, and that the will should be reviewed. To stop this madness, Viana asked with all her might for a plate to be put on the floor. When everyone turned to look at her, she said that she thought she had misheard, and she asked to repeat all these words again. These people accused her grandmother of treason and said that her Aunt Ariel was not from the Passon family at all, which the girl could have taken as a personal insult. Her relatives began to apologize to her and say that they meant something completely different. But Viana made it clear that it was not she who needed to be asked for forgiveness. She ordered to apologize to the Countess, but they considered her a commoner who was lucky to marry an aristocrat. The Marquise's daughter was soon to become crown princess and gain power, but they considered it unacceptable to apologize to the Countess. Those present tried to blame everything on my lady's youthful impulsiveness. After all, it was common for young people to make mistakes. One of the older family members was the most indignant, believing that the girl was crossing the line. He shouted that there was no place here for an impudent girl who hadn't even gone through the coming-of-age ceremony. Then my lady asked him to state his name. It was Chris Eslott. Viana giggled when she heard that name. After all, she couldn't remember this last name. She thought that this man had at least inherited a noble family name, but this was not the case. Milady continued to say that those who had not even inherited the Pisson name could not behave so arrogantly. And Viana, like a true aristocrat, also noticed that he didn't even have a middle name. And the middle name indicated direct affiliation with a noble family, and they could not pass on the noble title to their children. Viana may have been harsh, but she wasn't the one who forgot her place and did whatever she wanted. She could not consider a man who had neither a noble surname nor a middle name to be the eldest in a noble house. But they accused Viana of not having inherited this surname either. The girl did not calm down and said that a person who does not know noble etiquette cannot call himself a member of the Count's house, and someone had to be punished for this. But if Viana wanted it to end with them confessing to Evan, she wouldn't have started all this. She was afraid that these people would drag Elle down. Chris Eslot didn't calm down and didn't understand by what right Viana was saying all this. But she was Viana Asa Eliant, and Asa is not just a first name, but a second surname. Usually, an aristocratic woman took her husband's surname, but there were exceptions if there was no heir in the family, or if the head of the family decided to transfer the inheritance rights to his daughter. Then, according to imperial law, since a woman could not head a noble house, the rights passed to her husband or child. But if there was only one child, he could not inherit from two families. In that case, he received his father's surname, and the mother's rights were passed on through his middle name. In this case, Osa meant Osa Little Pisson, the name of the founder of the House of Pisson. By right of her name, Viana expelled these people from the noble house. She also warned that they should prepare to be accused of imposture. A week after her grandfather's funeral, Viana was supposed to meet the crown prince at the palace, but she was not taken to the wizard's palace. This was Baharat, the emperor's palace. The prince and the emperor himself were already waiting for her at tea. Seeing the girl, the emperor smiled and asked her to come in quickly. Viana greeted him according to the rules. The prince joyfully invited her to sit at the table. Viana was surprised that she was invited to the garden and not to the palace. The prince complimented her, saying that she was as beautiful as always. The emperor was touched by the sight of this couple. Viana acted very formally. The emperor was not very pleased with this, but the prince attributed it to her charming trait. His Majesty wanted them to begin to communicate more freely. After all, they were soon supposed to become one family. In 3 months, Viana's coming-of-age ceremony was supposed to take place, and everything was repeated again. Her coming-of-age ceremony will once again turn into a wedding with the crown prince. At the table, my lady heard that preparations for the wedding had already begun in secret. From now on, she decided to pretend that she knew nothing about it. And suddenly, the girl announced that she would not prepare for the coming-of-age ceremony. It was very strange to hear this, because this day was one of the most important in the life of every citizen of the empire. And for the nobility, this ceremony was their debut, which helped them take their place in society. Viana explained this by the death of her grandfather, and that she could not think of anything else at the moment. The emperor began to insist on a social debut, but the girl said that she was still too young and had never given receptions. But the emperor insisted, because she was the second head of the Eliant house, but had not yet been introduced to society. His Majesty was ready to arrange her debut ball immediately, but Viana did not accept this gift. The girl's introduction made the emperor angry. The young people looked at him in silence. Having cooled down a bit, he continued to say that Viana would still have to appear before society. But the girl was not ready and assumed that she would do it in a year in the palace. The emperor was not satisfied with such terms, but according to the rules, Milady had 2 years after coming of age to carry out all these procedures. Having heard all this, the prince laughed, and suddenly he supported his bride, saying that she was right. He unexpectedly chose Viana's side. At this time, the emperor already had to go to a reception with officials, and he gave in, yielding to Viana. The young people walked silently along the castle corridor. Turning around, the girl asked how long the prince would watch her, but he replied that it was natural for the groom to see the bride off as she left the castle. She reminded him that he had never been so polite before. Leaning into her, he quietly said that he didn't think she would use the death of a loved one as a shield. But according to the girl, it was no worse than using the emperor as a sword. In her past life, she would have likely submitted to the emperor's will to avoid unnecessary problems. but the time for inaction had passed. The prince admitted that Viana had put him in his place. It was the first time the girl had seen the crown prince laugh so sincerely, but such laughter made her feel uneasy, as if she had lost, so she preferred to stay away from such people. The girl was about to go further, but the prince grabbed her hand. He stopped the girl and hugged her, and then he called her his Via, but she reminded him that she never gave him permission to use her pet name, and if she could, she would gladly cut it out for him. But there were too many prying eyes around, although the servants were standing far enough away and would hardly have heard their conversation. And as a groom, he must show even more courtesy. Viana whispered in the prince's ear that sometimes even the prey can bite the hunter, and after these words, she hit her with her shoe. If she had been wearing a stiletto heel, she would have happily stepped on his foot. The prince didn't show it, but only said that the girl was more complex than she seemed. And it's really not easy with her. And after these words, he kissed her on the forehead. Viana walked out of the castle gates and headed towards her carriage. They told the servants that today they were not going home, but to Via Bibaldi. Sitting in the carriage, Viana thought about what the crown prince wanted from her. That goodbye kiss never left my mind. If he really did fall in love, then it turns out that Viana involved something in the story that shouldn't have been involved. She was sure she had landed a blow, but he didn't look like he was at all disconcerted. On the contrary, he looked as if he was amused by something. Apparently, at some point, something went wrong. Lost in these thoughts, the girl did not pay attention to the road at all, and I didn't notice how they arrived on Bibaldi Street. The carriage arrived at Via Bibaldi. The girl had been thinking all this time that getting involved with the crown prince was very problematic. Lance's birthday was approaching, so now was the time to think not about a prince, but about a gift. But suddenly, she ran into some boy, and he got her dress dirty. He didn't expect this and got scared himself. Marie began to scold him, asking whether he knew who was in front of him, but she stopped her because it was a child. She almost turned into a cheap villain from a third-rate comic book. This stain on the skirt did not look like blood. It was probably paint. Suddenly, another person saw this picture. Turning around, the girl saw that it was the head of the guild. He too was very surprised to see Lady Eliant here. Evan apologized to her about Ray. The boy didn't even know that this girl knew the head of the guild. Lady Eliant wanted to prevent possible rumors. Evan invited her to a building that belonged to the Peason family. Viana wasn't very familiar with the property, but this jewelry store was familiar. When they entered the building, Evan led her further into a room unfamiliar to her. She had been here many times, but she had no idea that there was a door at the back leading to the third floor. Judging by the store, Evan was planning to start a luxury goods business for women. Viana had a feeling of déjà vu. Unlike most of the Peason stores, which bear the family name, Evan's boutiques, which specialize in women's luxury goods, operated under the name Louisia, with the slogan, "You are special." He hit the very core of women's vanity. Louise's products emphasized exclusivity, and exclusivity meant high prices. Looking back, it made no sense. Evan's marketing was impressive. Only someone with a deep understanding of female psychology could have come up with something like that. The reception area was furnished in such a way that one could feel a woman's hand in it. For all his knightly appearance, Evan turned out to be much more refined inside. At this time, an enthusiastic maid approached Vian. There was a whole collection of dresses on the second floor, so she lingered a little, choosing those that would suit Lady Eliant. But my lady flared up, saying that this was too much. Marie decided that she needed to go get another dress, and then she saw one of them. It turned out that he allowed her to choose any of those that were there. Viana realized that Louisia was preparing to launch again, just like last time. The dress Viana chose looked great on her. She asked the maid if there was anything else in the room, but she replied that there were only dresses. The fact that Evan was reviving Louisia was supposed to strengthen the trade of the Pisons, which was to her advantage. At that time, she spent fabulous sums of money because of her own vanity. The Empress could not spend state funds and spent personal savings and property that was annually received at her residence. Although Viana had inherited a lot from the Marquise and her grandfather, it would not be enough for all her whims now. And yet, until her very imprisonment, she felt no lack of anything, as if her wealth were an inexhaustible source. It was unclear where all this money came from. Evan walked into the room with Ray and apologized to her again, and the boy also asked for forgiveness. But the girl wasn't angry about the ruined dress. It was annoying, but not fatal. Yet she couldn't ignore it. The boy's careless actions could have harmed the Pisan's trade in the future. Perhaps she was exaggerating, but she saw it with her own eyes. Evan's face was full of worry as he rushed towards the child. It was strange that this child was so important to a man who ran an entire trading enterprise. And the most disgusting thing was that this boy had hair exactly like that person's. It seemed that the eyes were the same shade. Vayana sternly asked if the boy understood what he had done. She turned her head towards Evan, and he asked her what she should do with him now. The thought of killing this child even flashed through my mind. Hearing this, Evan pleaded with her for wisdom, and little Ray became very scared and began to shake all over. Vayana continued to say that if she finished him off here and now, no one would dare stop her, and the one he trusts so much will not become a hindrance to her. That was his mistake. Looking into the boy's eyes, my lady realized who he was. At that moment, Evan grabbed her hand. It looked like they had a lot to discuss. The boy tearfully asked for forgiveness and said that it was only his fault and that the teacher had nothing to do with it. Vayana was glad that the boy realized who he was. The Inayari were a tribal people from the west of the empire. These hermits were so kept aloof that almost nothing was known about them. The Inayari weren't just a different country, they were a completely different species, and their strange physical features and wild behavior only confirmed this. But what was most striking were the pupils. In their normal state, they were no different from human eyes. But when their emotions spilled out, their pupils narrowed into vertical slits, like those of cats. This boy had exactly those eyes. While he may not be purebred, he does not have the typical desert skin tone. But the Empire hated the half-breed Inayari even more. Because of one carelessness, he endangered not only himself, but also his teacher and the entire trade guild. So if he didn't want others to get hurt, he better be on his guard. Because if he relaxed even for a second, it wouldn't just be him who would pay the price. Everyone around him would be at risk. Tears streamed down the boy's cheeks. Vayana was talking about how he was angry because she had treated him so cruelly over some small talk. If this made him angry, then he needed to become stronger. So strong that even if I knew who he was, no one would dare raise a hand against him. And if he couldn't do that, then he had to keep his head down and live like a confused mouse for the rest of his days. That was the only way his loved ones could stay alive. Vayana ordered Marie to take the child and leave. Now she wanted to listen to Evan. He had to answer for his rudeness later. First of all, he asked to accept his apology again. But these words did not sound like the words of the head of the trading guild, because a merchant had to be able to get out of any situation. But Evan replied that the Count had always said that he was more of a knight than a merchant. It turned out that her grandfather knew what kind of person he was, and still entrusted him with the trading company. Vayana tried to understand what he saw in him that made him hand over the case. Suddenly, he said that my lady was very similar to the Count. He noticed this at their first meeting. Vayana assumed he meant the day her grandfather died. She could not understand his look, because it was not a touching meeting after a long separation. Vayana couldn't stand the way he thoughtlessly protected that child, and he probably thought she was a monster for the way she treated him. But the trust with which he looked at her was quite unexpected. Evan understood where she got those thoughts from. Ray was a half-blooded Inayari. One wrong move on his part, and the entire guild would be under attack, as half-bloods were considered criminals here, so those who sheltered them couldn't relax. Evan understood that my lady simply wanted to warn them about this. And the littlest Ray and Evan, well, the fact that he allowed the boy to wander around was entirely his fault. Now he saw for sure that my lady was an exact copy of her grandfather. After all, he too could scold them, so that no one would think it was a little. Evan was an orphan, a street scumbag who survived as best he could, and the one who saved him was Count Pisan. Without his kindness, Evan wouldn't be standing here, and not only him. He pulled dozens, if not hundreds of people out of hell, including that boy, even knowing who he was. Now Vayana understood why he called it atonement, but it was unclear for whom. It turned out that the grandfather spent his entire life atoning for his guilt by saving abandoned children, whom no one paid attention to, for her and the Marquise. He saved many children, and all of them were now connected to the Merchant Guild. Now it was clear why grandfather handed over the case to Evan. He needed a person who would keep his secrets and protect them. Vayana now understood the reason. Well, something still didn't add up. Maybe he wasn't the real head of the guild, although he turned out to be reliable. But a person in his style couldn't build Louisia from scratch, which meant someone else was behind it. At that moment, the Countess entered the door. Viana didn't expect to see her here. Looking at her, my lady began to guess everything. Louis was the pet name the Countess called her grandfather, and Asha was the pet name he called her. If you combine them, it will be very consonant with the brand that Countess Anasia created. It was even stupid that Viana only realized this now. She asked the Countess how to understand all this, but she asked her not to misunderstand. The Countess handed Viana the things that her grandfather had left behind. It would be more appropriate if the girl kept them to herself. Viana tried to figure out if the Countess's expression was pretense. Even if she had deceived their family, it didn't matter now. After all, my grandfather died peacefully under the care of his wife. The box contained things that belonged to Siona, Milady's mother, but the Countess did not need them. Looking at Viana, she asked if it was really she who refused to acknowledge Siona as her mother. But the girl considered this to be overly intrusive on her part. At this moment, she became unpleasant to the Countess. But the girls didn't care about it. The Countess was surprised by Viana's indifference. Milady didn't see any sense in all this. The Countess did not shout that she could have everything she wanted, and her detached expression was incomprehensible to her. But Viana believed that in this situation, she should be the one shouting. The Countess accused her of indifference to everything around her. After all, the girl didn't even care what high society thought about her. But Viana wasn't going to care about the disapproving looks. She just wanted to live the way she wanted. She didn't recall behaving recklessly enough to cause alarm. And lately, she had been behaving quite reservedly, spending time with Lant at the estate. But she did not quite understand what the Duchess wanted to convey to her. She asked why my lady recognized Elle's right of inheritance. After all, the girl's health was unstable, and by all the rules she could not be an heir. If Viana, as the bearer of the founder's name, had objected, the will would never have come into force. But the girl did not want to take the title away from Elle. The Countess asked if she had any ambitions. Of course they were, because who except a saint does not experience desire? Viana reminded that she is the Crown Prince's fiancée. The Countess understood that she was speaking about the status that she herself was trying to delay by skipping the coming-of-age ceremony. But only the Emperor and the Principal were supposed to know about this information. It was very important for Viana to find out where the Countess got this information. She reassured the girl, saying that she was not following her, but learned about it from people from the Emperor's palace. To confirm her words, she swore by her daughter. Viana knew that having her own people in the palace was quite resourceful on her part, as it was necessary to manage such a large trading guild. The Duchess asked the girl what family meant to her, but she admitted that it didn't really matter to her. Without holding back her tears, the Countess admitted that she had the feeling that the girl could disappear at any moment, and with such behavior, she drove her loved ones crazy. The Duchess hated her indifference, even after she had received all the Count's love and attention. She was angry that her granddaughter didn't even try to find out what her grandfather went through for her. The Countess wanted to hate Milady, but at the same time, she was grateful to her for giving her Elle. She did not approach Count Pisson in order to take possession of his fortune. She simply wanted to be by his side until the very end, because she truly loved him. Now, in June, the relationship between these two people was unclear. Evan admitted that Anasia was one of those whom the Count saved. He was their benefactor. His divine hand became their salvation. Evan asked the girl if she knew why he saved him. He did all this for his granddaughter. The Count traveled all over the world collecting children, some of whom possessed outstanding abilities. Among them, Anasia was special. Her business acumen was amazing. He spared neither time nor money for their training and support, and all this for the sake of Viana. But she didn't understand how caring for these children affected her. It turned out that the company did not belong to either Evan or Anasia. She was completely Viana, but this had to be kept secret. After all, this could harm my lady's safety. After all, she is the fiancée of the Crown Prince, and even now his opponents pose a threat to her. If the entire fortune of the Pisson family had been openly transferred to her, she would have been eliminated immediately. Anasia did not reveal this secret in her past life. She said that she hated the girl because she took away her grandfather's attention, but she also called her sweet because she looked like him, and later thanked her for Elle. In her past life, the Countess did not tell the truth as revenge for her dead child, but even so, she did everything to repay her grandfather for his kindness. Viana's wealth in this life which seemed bottomless, had its source in the form of a trading company. Evan swore his heart and soul to be eternally loyal to Viana. Time passed, and the day of meeting with the crown prince arrived again. Viana sat in the carriage, looking at the ring with the Pisson family symbol. All the family's trading companies used his family name as their coat of arms, and only Louisia used a different symbol. The family coat of arms often served as the seal of the head of the house, and those from noble houses received a personal seal upon coming of age. On her 16th birthday, Vianne became the bride of a prince, and the seal of the crown princess replaced her family seal. Well, this ring was made by Vianna's grandfather at birth, so that it would be waiting for her when she turned 16. He prepared all this for her since birth, for her safety and happiness. The Countess and Evan also went through his school. Anasia is supposed to become Vianna's assistant, and Evan is her knight. Anasia married the Count to be able to be closer to the girl, so when Vianna first mentioned it as a child, the Countess thought she was making fun of her. There was only one moment between them. He said that he wanted to dedicate his life to Vianne, and asked her to hug him at least once. It was a shameless request, but the Countess was glad that she agreed. After all, thanks to this, she had Elle. The only order they received from the Count was to protect his granddaughter. They did everything to fulfill his will. Grandfather had been gentle and kind to Vianna for over 4 years. He had prepared so much for her, but there was sadness and guilt in his eyes. The girl realized too late how much he loved her. Only when it became impossible to return this love did she realize how much it meant. A servant came up to the carriage and apologized for being late, but Vianna didn't know him. It was Zik, a servant of the Khyber Palace. He explained that the crown prince was not present at the moment, and that the empress was afraid that Vianna would come, and had sent him to notify him of this in vain. It was a pointless trip, but the servant added that the empress was waiting for my lady. If this man was really her servant, then refusal could create problems. And Vianna went to the reception with Her Majesty. The empress was already waiting for the guest. Vianna Asa Eliant greeted the moon of the empire. But the empress was not waiting for her alone. The girl also greeted the emperor's first wife. They invited Vianna to sit at the table. The emperor's first wife announced that she had dared to join them. Vianna understood that the first empress did not come for nothing, so it was she who summoned my lady, using the empress's name. The first empress was glad to see Vianna in good health. Without wasting any time, my lady asked for what reason Her Majesty had invited her. But the first empress took up the conversation, saying that Her Majesty had no one her age in the palace, and she was bored. It would be good if the young lady visited her more often. Her Majesty confirmed these words, but it was a miserable lie. Moreover, the first empress, judging by her tone, was accustomed to looking down on the empress. Her Majesty was informed about Count Pisson, and also that this case caused a lot of noise. After all, they said that the young lady had driven out her own relatives. Looking at the first empress, Vianna realized that she was the same as in her past life. Last time she also teased her with that saccharine smile. Vianne noted that she showed a keen interest in the affairs of the House of Pisson, but for the first empress this was normal, because they were soon to become one family. The first empress, although she was the eldest daughter of a count's family and already betrothed, voluntarily entered the harem as the emperor's concubine. Having given birth to the emperor's first child, she used this as leverage, received the title of First Imperial Concubine, and elevated her Moitan family from a county to a marquisate. The first prince was considered the heir until the current crown prince was born. The influence of the first concubine rivaled that of the empress, but everything collapsed when the crown prince was born. For them, it was like a carcinoma in the heart, and in her eyes, Vianna was just another obstacle in the way. Although she herself did not want to marry him, she had no intention of losing to this woman. Vianna recalled that the first prince's wife still had no children, although about 10 years had passed since their wedding, pretending to be worried about this. The first prince had 1 official wife and 3 concubines. He married early, but even now, at over 30 years old, he had no heir, and this was the first concubine's weak point. The woman didn't even expect that the young lady would be so attentive to details. But it was strange that strange rumors circulated about such a virtuous person. The first concubine even said that she and the empress were worried about her, leading the girl to ask what these rumors were. And Vianna decided to play along with her. It was said that the young lady was hugging a man on the main street, which was an unheard-of scandal for the future crown princess. Viana knew it was about the day she met Evan, but they hadn't even touched. She pretended not to understand what all the fuss was about. But the first concubine insisted that these rumors should not be taken lightly, as the crown prince or the emperor might find out about them. The emperor might be angry about this, so the young lady had to be careful. The words of these individuals were enough for the rumor to be considered true. The first empress was a master at this. In her past life, Viana had fallen for this trick again and again. Even now, one awkward step and danger was imminent. At worst, her engagement will be broken off due to her indecent behavior. The first concubine's goal was clear, but now rumors were meaningless to my lady. Calling off the engagement was even tempting, but if it happened under the stigma of dishonor, then it would be difficult to remain in the house of Eliant. It was already difficult for Lant to become a marquise, since he was born out of wedlock, and the presence of his sister would only complicate the situation. She couldn't return to the county of Pisone either, since she had already transferred her inheritance rights to El. Then only the trade guild remained. In any case, Viana should not have been left without a roof. But there was no reason to let this woman get the better of me. But, by the way, Her Highness also once found herself at the center of a scandal. The first prince was now 35. That story happened around the same time. It was said to be a huge scandal, and it had to do with the groom she had been engaged to before she became a concubine. His Majesty was then very angry, because the pregnancy occurred soon after she received the emperor's favor. Then everything became quiet, because the first prince was incredibly similar to the emperor, and even the black priests, who guarded the purity of the imperial blood, silently recognized him. But a shadow of doubt remained, and she hardly thought that anyone would remember events from such a long time ago. It was interesting to see how the first concubine would get out of this now. She admitted that my lady was quite fearless. But when you become an empress, you need to be able to manage those who are below you in status, as the head of the inner court. But she believed that excessive insolence was not bravery, but recklessness. Depending on who is exhibiting it, recklessness can sometimes pass for strength. Suddenly, the empress remembered that Viana's coming-of-age ceremony was coming soon, and she asked how the preparations for this event were going. But my lady replied that everyone goes through this ceremony. The first concubine clarified that her ceremony was a special occasion. She knew perfectly well that Viana would not have a ceremony and wanted to hurt her. The first concubine reminded her that Milady had no one who could organize the celebration. She wanted Viana to admit herself that there would be no ball. But the first favorite continued to insist, and now the girl began to think. And suddenly, she volunteered to be the escort. It was a strong move. The news of the first wife's proposal quickly spread through social circles, and no noble lady would dare to become the girl's patroness. Viana decided to offer this role to Anasia. She didn't have time to finish the words from where the first wife, as a hand appeared on her shoulder. It was a prince, and the girl said that her maternal grandmother had already agreed to be her escort. The prince missed his bride very much. The empress was shocked by his behavior, but he could not sit still knowing that his bride was here. According to the first concubine, this was very reckless for the crown prince of the empire. But he was at that age when his heart beat faster. He could not be calm when his bride's ceremony approached. The prince hugged his bride in front of everyone. Viana decided to play along with the prince. Looking into his eyes, she whispered that her wait had lasted an eternity, but the prince didn't know she was here. If she had come to his palace straight away, she wouldn't have had to wait so long. Probably everyone thought that she wouldn't be able to say anything to her first wife. Milady told the prince that her patronymic was yours, and she invited the girl here herself. This day was meant exclusively for the two of them, but it seems that Her Majesty has forgotten about it. Her Majesty had to agree with this, because nothing should disturb the time allotted for them. The first wife was surprised that Countess Garfield would accompany Milady, but this was quite natural, because Lady Eliant would become the wife of his grandson. The first wife also believed that the ceremony would take place in Eliant's house, but she didn't know that His Majesty was already preparing the ceremony in her Herrick Hall. This news made her very angry. It was the largest hall in the entire palace, intended only for state events, but Lady Eliant was not only the daughter of a marquise, but also a future princess. The first wife considered it unacceptable that such a thing was being carried out without the knowledge of the head of the inner courtyard. But the empress did not respond to this. It was the emperor's decision. No one could challenge it. The Empress had to agree that the Crown Prince was right. His Majesty personally participated in the organization. The prince advised his first wife to avoid showing disloyalty. The prince and his bride turned away. Viana looked at the prince. His face was gloomy, and she decided that he was angry. But suddenly, the prince picked her up in his arms. She didn't even understand what was happening. He carried her in his arms across the entire garden. Finally, Viana asked to be put down on the ground. All the servants saw her in the arms of a man. Finally, the prince asked why she had come to the palace. It turned out that he had sent her a message asking her not to come, but she had not received it. Apparently, this was the work of the first empress. She made sure that this message did not reach Lady Eliant. Few people knew that the prince was not in the courtyard, so it was not difficult to guess. It turned out that the crown prince rushed over as soon as he learned that Milady had arrived at the palace. But now there was nothing that could be done, and the girls had to make concessions. Her coming-of-age ceremony was about to take place. It turned out that the prince lied to the first empress, but the prince did not consider this a lie. His Majesty was planning to hold the ceremony in the Irhar Hall. But as the prince said before, nothing will happen without Viana's consent. He knew that the girl had doubts about marrying him. Therefore, the prince suggested that she compromise. In exchange for agreeing to perform the coming-of-age ceremony, he was ready to fulfill any of her wishes. But my lady only wanted to break off the engagement. The prince made it clear to her that this was impossible. In return, he suggested that she postpone the wedding. For Viana, this was already a victory. The prince also advised her to avoid the first empress. After all, she was like a viper, and Viana could not yet cope with her. But the girl was only the daughter of a marquise. She had no power to refuse such invitations. The prince admitted that his bride was very modest. She managed to cope with the first empress very well this time. He watched this verbal battle. It was one of the most beautiful spectacles in the world. He didn't interfere with the game before it started. Viana wanted to step on his foot with her shoe again, but the prince managed to remove his leg. He laughed and said he wouldn't fall for that trick again. But then Viana suddenly kicked him in the shin. He certainly didn't expect this. Smiling, the girl said that she never uses the same trick twice. In the end, Viana was unable to avoid the coming-of-age ceremony, since the palace took care of all the preparations, and she only had to finish the rest. Anasia saw this as an opportunity and decided to use the girl to promote Raisha. This was different from Viana's previous incarnation. Well, it seemed like a good idea to her, and she agreed. As expected, Raishi's production was top-notch. Lant was delighted with his sister's image. Anasia asked the girl if she liked the work of their masters, and congratulating her on her 16th birthday, she presented her with a box. It was a gift from her and Evan. They thought the set would be perfect for the ceremony, and prepared it especially for her. But Evan was upset that he couldn't present it in person. One might think that these decorations were originally part of the dress's design. Viana was pleased with her look. Viana expected a reward for promoting the company, but in the trade group, everything was hers. She was more insatiable than everyone thought. Lant also wanted to go to this ceremony, but he still has 4 more years to wait. Anasia asked if she could really come to the ceremony. In her past life, she was not present at the ceremony, although she was called a countess. But in fact, she was a woman from a simple family. But now everything was different, and the answer was obvious. High society was usually very conservative, so it is obvious why Anasia was hesitant to join it. Viana asked how she perceived it. The countess considered them family. After apologizing, the girl said that she would never be able to count like that. She was like a friend to her. It's perfectly normal to attend a friend's coming-of-age party, and advised her to keep her head up. Now they were supposed to meet in the banquet hall. Lant followed his sister. Having caught up with her, he took her hand. He loved his sister very much. The two of them left the palace. The marquise was already waiting for them on the street. They walked into the carriage together. Lant wished his sister a safe journey. The marquise looked at his daughter in silence. Viana had been noticing something for a long time now. Every time they were alone with the marquise, the atmosphere became strangely tense. If she had known that this would happen now, she would have asked Anasia to go with them. They arrived at the emperor's courtyard. The marquis was the first to get out of the carriage, and then, as before, he offered his hand to his daughter. She even wondered if he had always been so gentle, but he always observed the rules of etiquette. Apparently, this was his way of showing concern. Vian thought he wanted to tell her something, but he remained silent, and she asked him to let go of his hand. But suddenly, her father said that she was incredibly beautiful today. She couldn't believe she was hearing this from the Marquise. She had already noticed that his attitude had changed. At some point, he began to regularly dine with the children if he was not busy, and even entrusted his daughter with complete control over the internal affairs of the estate. The girl couldn't understand why he changed and when it started. Perhaps from that very moment. But these changes did not seem bad to her at all. And today was the day of her coming of age. She was supposed to look flawless. Viana was confident that everything would be fine. The coming-of-age ceremony took place in the Erhars Hall, as befitted a lady from the House of Eliant. The first empress suspected that a surprise in the form of an engagement might await her today. Eventually, Viana returned here again on the day she came of age. All the ladies were discussing the birthday girl's dress. She was very elegant and refined. The prince came out to meet the girl. The Marquise and Viana greeted the son of the empire in May. The prince said that Viana looked absolutely stunning today, and he invited her to the first dance. But she had no choice, and she naturally agreed. And they began to dance. It was Viana's first real coming-of-age ceremony. In her past life, she turned into the wedding of the crown prince. The prince saw that she was deeply thinking about something and asked her to focus only on him. But it was her holiday, and she still had a lot of people to greet. He hoped that she had finally developed warm feelings for him. But the girl had no such intentions. After all, she knew as soon as he met her, his heart would change. But the prince found Viana completely unbearable. She really shouldn't have behaved like that. She, the one connected with the crown prince, also came of age this year. But everything the prince said today about the girl's beauty was true. Viana wondered if perhaps something had changed in him too. Or maybe she herself, without realizing it, was craving his attention again. But this could not go on any longer. Duke Disha and his daughter will arrive in the capital in 2 years. She urgently needed to get information. But there was very little information. Almost nothing was known about the West, and Evan was even planning to send people there. Some western lands bordered Inayari, and as a rule, the inhabitants of these places moved to other regions. But western families were reluctant to leave their homes, so impersonal forays there would reveal nothing. But when it came to the Daisha estate, things were much more complicated. But it wasn't Evan's fault. The current Duke of Disha has lived in seclusion for a long time. The unfortunate prince who never became emperor, although he was very close to it. His father was the eldest son of the late emperor and crown prince, and he excelled in both civil and military affairs, but had no heir. Then, as if by a miracle, the crown princess became pregnant. The previous emperor was overjoyed and held a grand celebration throughout the country, but the happiness did not last long. Before the princess gave birth, the heir died after falling from a horse, and the elderly emperor, shocked by the death of his son, fell ill and died. Before his death, he bestowed upon his unborn grandson the surname of Disha instead of the dynastic one, and the title of duke. And there was wisdom in this decision. After the death of the emperor, a bloody struggle for the throne began, and the current emperor destroyed all his relatives, leaving no one alive except Duke Disha, who could not claim the throne. He was never officially listed as a member of the dynasty, so he was not considered part of the family, which is why he survived. But the blood flowing in his veins was undoubtedly royal. That is why he was nicknamed the Unfortunate Prince. Exiled to the western lands, he never returned to the capital. The first time he left his lands was when he brought his daughter to her ball. Even though no one knew what he looked like, everything was clear at first glance. Golden eyes were a symbol of the dynasty, like those of a true heir. His daughter walked next to him. She was undoubtedly beautiful. Her long hair swayed softly. Her slender silhouette seemed airy. The innocent face awakened in men the desire to protect. Everything about her was so unlike Viana that she hated her immediately. Iren's Kavil Daish's habit of shedding tears at every careless word irritated and disgusted her. Evan thought that Lady Eliant was ill and wanted to call a doctor, but she said it was just a migraine. Just thinking about this woman made her lose her composure. To avoid marrying the crown prince, she had to bring her to the capital before the ceremony, or postpone the wedding until she arrived. But both options were not so easy to implement. Viana still told Evan to send people west and get information. She wanted to know everything about the Duke's daughter. Then Evan said that what she asked for last time was ready. Viana decided it was a gift for Lant. While she was waiting for Evan, She decided to rest a little. But suddenly that boy came into the room. The boy apologized for what happened at their first meeting, as it was his first time meeting a person of the upper class. Viana asked him to be more careful, because not all aristocrats were so lenient, and then he asked to teach him to become stronger. After all, he must protect Fiona. Lady Eliant asked if he knew who Fiona was, and the boy explained that he saw her that time when she came with Aunt Anasia. The girl could not remember there being a child with the same name as hers. Nobody told him, but he immediately understood who his grandfather meant. He said that Fiona was weak, that her heart was wounded, so they had to protect her. The girl couldn't believe that for her grandfather, she had always been fragile and vulnerable, because he had ordered such a little boy to protect her. This boy considered her the strongest. After all, even Evan couldn't resist her. Vian found it funny that such a little one already knew the hierarchy. Ray was still too young for his word to carry weight. Well, he suddenly said that the girl should teach him, because she also should protect Viana. He sincerely thought that they were from the same caravan, and everyone who was in the caravan must protect Viana. Here he was not mistaken. She really had to protect herself. Ray wanted to become an aristocrat, because they are the strongest. Viana found it funny that the half-breed Inayari wanted to become an aristocrat. The boy began to say that he was not an Inayari, but his eyes said otherwise. He didn't even know who Viana was, but he already wanted to protect her. Normally, my lady wouldn't even listen to him, but now she was curious to see how far he would go, and she promised to help him become an aristocrat. The boy had to prove that he was a warrior. Milady asked if Ray knew about Rochester Academy. It was the most prestigious educational institution on the entire continent. There they taught fencing, diplomacy, politics, medicine, and much more. Other academies looked at pedigree, but Rochester required only a basic education. But in reality, only a few ordinary people entered there. The tuition fees were so high that even all the nobles could afford it. And if you were admitted, in order to graduate, you had to pass numerous exams, and you had to complete it in 7 years. If these conditions were too harsh, Ray could refuse. Ray asked if it was true that he would make an aristocrat out of him if he completed this study. Viana answered him affirmatively. During his training, he had to carefully conceal his identity. Once he enters the academy, he will no longer be associated with the trading house. Even if the boy was exposed, the clan was not supposed to suffer. He will have to sever all ties with this place that is dear to him. She asked him again if he was sure he agreed, and Ray unequivocally replied that he did. He needed to become a nobleman and protect Viana. The girl was curious about who this child was talking about. She also asked when he was going to implement his ideas. Suddenly, Evan entered the room. He was unhappy with Ray's behavior. Evan handed my lady a gift box. She took it in her hands and opened it. There was a medallion inside. Although Lance's gift was late, she hoped that he would like it. She was getting ready to go home, and Evan wanted to see her off. But Viana asked him to prepare a carriage for her. Suddenly, Evan asked if he was bothering her. After all, he was her knight, and his goal and duty was to protect her. But she asked him not to be a prisoner of the promise he made to her grandfather. She wanted to lighten his load at least a little. Viana was sure that her grandfather would understand her. But suddenly, Evan blocked her path with his hand. Initially, he simply carried out the Count's will. The first time he saw Viana was at the Marquise's funeral. Now she realized that this was the same young man who supported her grandfather. He remembered how she stood proudly among all those whispering people, and it made an impression. Evan immediately knew that it was her he had to protect. He wanted to protect the girl who stood alone among those who did not even hide their anger, and not at someone's request. Evan asked to be allowed to fulfill the vow he made as a child. It turned out that he really did sincerely want to be her knight. Since he chose this path himself, she did not refuse, and she accepted his oath with gratitude. Evan apologized because it was rush hour, and preparing the carriage was not so easy. Viana remembered Anasia's words that Evan's main concern was her safety. When he grabbed her hand the first time they met, you were afraid she would be scared of Ray's eyes. After all, most people froze in horror when they saw the Inayari's gaze. Viana was indeed very scared when she first saw those eyes. Pupils sharply narrowed into a vertical line, scarlet eyes. Remembering this, Viana almost fainted. In her past life, she only moved between the Eliant household and the imperial palace, not noticing anyone except the crown prince. She couldn't remember where she saw the Inayari from, as if there was a gap in her memory. Evan took the lady in his arms. Suddenly, the prince appeared and asked why his bride was in the arms of another man. Viana could tell from his voice that he was angry. But Evan did not let her go and asked the prince to step aside. Then the prince drew his sword. His blade touched Evan's neck. The prince once again sternly told him to return his bride to him. But Evan wanted to show her to the doctor first. Then Viana ordered her to be lowered to the ground. He had no choice but to obey. The prince asked how he should understand all this. Evan blocked Viana's view with his body. She understood that if things continued like this, the knight would have problems. Coming out from behind his back, she asked the prince to put away his sword, and he fulfilled her request. Viana had no intention of making excuses to her fiancé. Then he grabbed her in his arms and put her on his shoulder, and he carried it to the carriage. The prince didn't understand what she was thinking about. Viana didn't understand where all this anger was coming from, because he never cared about his fiancé's reputation. She asked what he was going to do with Evan. Viana was worried about him because he was her man. But the prince warned that he should not be provoked. He had never shown such emotions before, but now he acts like a jealous lover. Suddenly, Viana asked if he loved her. After all, if it wasn't about reputation and not about warm feelings, then it was unclear why he was angry. Viana asked if he still asked her to love him. She didn't want to suffer from a love that only brings pain. She wanted to meet a man who would love only her, cherish only her, for the sake of the children and live happily. But the prince is definitely not that man. Now, the relationship with the crown prince was over. After such words, he would hardly dare to approach Viana. She understood that his pride would not allow him to do this, and he would distance himself, and she would learn to live with a nagging pain in her heart. But suddenly, someone from behind hugged her by the shoulders. Viana turned around abruptly and hit the prince in the face. He considered this a rather violent reaction to the groom's embrace, and assumed that he would have to risk his life to allow himself anything more. But my lady had no intention of crossing these boundaries with him. The prince thought it was all because of Evan. The prince was annoyed that for 4 years she had been calling him Your Highness, and this man by his first name. He accused her of always being like this, of not showing any curiosity towards him, let alone the tenderness that others gave him. But with Evan, she was different and smiling. She shrank from the prince's touch, but she felt so calm in this man's arms. He was clearly someone special to her. Well, no matter what the prince did, she didn't let him get close to her even a little. It drove him crazy. Viana decided that he was upset because the woman he considered his was slipping right through his fingers. The prince asked what he should do to overcome the wall she had erected. Before, I really coveted the influence of her family, her clan, and her wealth. But now everything is different. But now he wanted to smile next to her, counting the days until their meeting, wanting her gaze to be directed only at him. And when he saw her in the arms of another, she wanted to tear him apart. If this is love, then he loves her. It was the recognition that Viana had longed for in her past life. Could she trust him? Where was the guarantee that his words would not disappear when he met another? From the very beginning, they were connected by necessity, not by feelings. There was no love in this deal, it was a political alliance. But now the prince needed her. He asked not to push him away, but he said that he didn't want to win her heart by whining. Now this man looked nothing like the prince she had known before. Or maybe in reality, Viana was afraid not of loving him, but of losing herself in this love. But she wasn't going to run away from him all her life for fear of suffering again. Turning to the prince, she told him to do everything possible to win her heart towards him. In all the commotion, Viana didn't notice how she dropped the box. She was no longer afraid of falling in love with the crown prince. She was afraid of the consequences that this love would entail. A conflict with her first wife would inevitably begin. And in 2 years, errands will appear again. But whatever her attitude towards this diva, she still felt guilty for what she had done in her past life. She simply loved the prince, just like Viana once did. The laws of the empire permitted not only polygamy, but also marriages beyond the 5th degree of kinship. Since they were 6th cousins with the crown prince, their union did not violate the law. But for Viana, this turned out to be an insurmountable obstacle. At that time, Viana had no power to prevent her from entering the palace, and after the death of the emperor, this circumstance became inevitable. From that day on, she began to torment her rival, cut the funds allocated for the maintenance of her court, and humiliated her rival in front of everyone. It was too easy to disgrace her. The husband did not react to this in any way. He consoled Araines and wiped away her tears. His silent consent only fueled Viana's cruelty. Blinded by jealousy, she decided to poison her rival. But she miraculously survived, and Viana was taken into custody. And even now, she had no intention of welcoming her with open arms. Evan was injured, but still found the strength to send her migraine medicine. Everything was already completely different. Lant knocked on the door. He came to her without even having dried his hair completely. Viana asked him to dry them better next time, so as not to get sick. He is no longer that timid boy who trembled with fear. Viana presented him with a gift, and the boy opened the box. It was his personal seal. Usually it was given to her when she came of age, but Viana couldn't resist. The shamrock symbolizes happiness. After all, she wanted him to always be happy. Viana expected gratitude, but the guy stood there with his mouth open and didn't say a word. And then, falling to his knees, he said thank you. His sister had it specially ordered and asked him to use it until he inherited the family seal. She couldn't keep her brother in hothouse conditions forever. He didn't have to become the head of the clan if he didn't want to. She trained him not so that he would become a marquise, but so that he would have more opportunities when he found his true calling. She promised to support him always. After all, he will forever remain her brother, and she asked me to never forget this. Well, that was a vain hope. The crown prince came to see her. Prince said that Viana was still beautiful. Milady greeted the prince. He asked why she was behaving so formally with him. It seems that the one who loves more really suffers more. The prince said that he missed her very much, and she decided that he had gone crazy. Suddenly, the girl saw that the butler had been there all this time. He pretended as if he hadn't heard anything. She asked him to leave them. When the butler left, they were left alone. The prince invited her to sit next to him. He insisted that he had been thinking about them since the moment he woke up. The girl captivated him more and more. Viana understood that he was trying to seduce her. The prince hoped that his face did not disgust her. He came to melt the ice in her heart. She had no time for empty talk with him. But the prince made her feel uneasy. In her past life, the prince hated her. Back then, she just clung to his love. The prince did his duty and treated her with respect as the future empress. Now she didn't understand how she should behave with his highness. He was throwing her off balance. The prince was glad that at least he was not disgusting to my lady. Viana began preparing for the camera hunting tournament. It was one of the most important annual holidays of the empire, where the royal family and the highest nobility gathered. It was more like a celebration than a hunt, and both women and men took part in it. Viana was now obliged to be there as the crown prince's bride. Anasia did a good job, and the girl offered her some tea. Anasia happily agreed. After trying this tea, she was truly delighted. Viana explained that it was reishi petal tea. These were flowers associated with the crown princess and were forbidden to be grown without permission. His Majesty himself sent them in abundance. She was allowed to use them for tea, so there was nothing to worry about. Anasia noticed that the crown prince often visited their estate. Viana said that something serious happened in the west. It was so serious that Evan went there personally. The crown prince was very jealous, and evil tongues accused Viana and Evan of having a secret affair. The prince visited the estate so often to prove their closeness. She was interested to see how he was going to win her over. The first day of the imperial hunting competition has arrived. Viana needed time to prepare. A gust of wind almost blew the hat off her head. The marquis helped to hold her back. Viana adjusted her hat as needed. It was clear from the marquis's expression that he wanted to talk about something, but the horn blew and they had to leave soon. Viana was surprised that the marquis did not go with his majesty. Father was simply worried that she would go hunting without an escort. She never thought he could be so caring. The hunting grounds were located high in the mountains in difficult terrain. There were dangerous predators there, but all necessary precautions were taken. There was nothing to worry about. The marquise was still hesitant. But suddenly, Countess Scythe volunteered to keep the girl company. She was the emperor's eldest daughter, former first princess, and now countess. But in their past life, they didn't get along. After her mother's death, she raised the crown prince as her own son. On those days when Viana behaved recklessly, only she dared to openly criticize her. And in response, she received anger and humiliation. But now she looked friendly, and it was necessary to thank her. She asked to be called by her first name without titles. Aristocrats from the borderlands rarely came to hunt. Isabella could see that Viana was surprised by her presence, But then she remembered that the Countess had written her a letter in which she asked to meet. If she leaves her company now, the Marquise will be calmer. The Marquise nodded approvingly, and the girl agreed. Time was running out, and it was time to get into the carriage. The Countess was the first to get into the carriage. The Marquise escorted Milady to the carriage. Finally, he asked to call him when he arrived. The Countess was surprised that the Iron Chancellor was especially sensitive to such tenderness. In the carriage, Isabella said that she really wanted to see Viana. What if she asked if the girl loved the Crown Prince? This question was too direct. She was very worried about him, because he was like a son to her. Isabella's mother died in childbirth, and Empress Lyra took her in as a baby. She was the mother of the Crown Prince. After her death, looking at the lonely boy, she vowed that she was paying for her care by caring for him. She decided not to marry and stay close to the prince, but her future husband was so persistent that she had to leave the court. So she naturally began to take an interest in Viona, the one who would be next to the prince in her place. She apologized for checking out the girl. She didn't want to hide anything and hoped for a good relationship with my lady. Isabella asked if the girl wanted to know what she was testing her for, but she suddenly replied that she was not interested. But rumors suggested that the prince had reason to be jealous. Viana replied that one shouldn't believe the rumors that are circulating about her. Rumors claimed that she was ruthless and treacherous, even getting rid of her family in an attempt to take over the Pisson wealth. They remembered how she kicked out the nanny and the maids. She also had fun with other men when she was engaged to the prince. Viana didn't even think that these rumors had already reached the south. The Countess didn't want to believe them, but she was still worried about the prince. The shawl that the Countess gave was of a simple design, but made of luxurious fabric. This was not unusual. The noblewomen were interested in a striking design, not practicality. Well, that's exactly why Viana liked her. The Countess asked if it made her angry that commoners were using this design. She really hoped that the girl would use it. And then people finally asked what kind of test she had arranged. If Milady were to judge a person's sincerity based on their less than luxurious appearance, the Count would doubt her usefulness to the Crown Prince. Viana forgave her this time, but such one-sided checks did not give her pleasure. Isabella was very nervous, thinking about what she would do if my lady did not forgive her. But she never heard an answer to her question from her. Does the girl love the Crown Prince? But Tanya didn't know what to answer, because she was still unsure. The Countess decided that she did not love him. But could love have any meaning in a political marriage? Isabella lived for 30 years in a palace infested with poisonous snakes. I should have known what would happen with their marriage. She was not so naive as to believe in love in a political marriage, but I was sure that even in such a marriage, there could be love. There was nothing better than loving the person you would spend your whole life with. The Countess asked if she hated His Highness. For now, it was possible to start with friendship. The Crown Prince was a lonely man, because the first prince was already laying claim to his place. Even with the support of the Emperor, it was not easy to take his place. The Countess was sure that he loved the girl much more than she thought. In all his last letters, he wrote to the Countess about his bride. That's why she really wanted to meet her. Viana understood that the Countess treated her with kindness. The grandson's carriage stopped, and the prince approached and asked what they were discussing. They didn't even notice that the carriage had stopped. They had arrived some time ago, but no one had come out, so he decided to disturb them. Isabella was very happy to see Varan. They were real lovebirds. The prince also hugged my lady. After all, they couldn't lose to that pair. But suddenly, the spouses began to kiss. It was a kiss full of passion and love. Looking at this milady, I really wanted to lose. The prince said that the bride was as beautiful as ever. He really wanted to kiss those lips. But there was still a lot to do. Isabella even thought that she had intervened in vain. After all, you shouldn't interfere in a romantic relationship between a man and a woman. The prince was already ready for their wedding. Viana placed her hands on his shoulders, and then she quietly said that her left leg was between his legs. Her foot might have struck, but she wasn't going to give any more warnings. This situation confused the prince. He left and asked to take care of Vian. The Count apologized to the girl for the prince, and she thought that she seemed to have spoken quietly, and he should not have heard her. No matter how shameless she was considered, she could not be suspected of trying to end the entire dynasty. Although the circumstances took a somewhat strange turn, the Countess nevertheless introduced her husband, Varan Lloyd Seath, to Vian. The girl was also glad to meet them. The Count noticed how much Milady was attracted to the Marquis Eliant. The fact that she repaid twice as much as she received was a special trait of the Alliance. Now Viana realized that he had definitely heard everything. There was no one else around, because the hunt had begun. It turned out that the king announced its beginning immediately upon his arrival. It was time for them to go too. The count and countess asked if Viana would go with them, but she didn't like hunting at all, and she didn't want to be caught between this happy couple, so she refused. And Viana replied that she would go and rest. Just by looking at this couple, it was clear how much they loved each other, although there was nothing to envy. But suddenly, Viana saw the emperor's first concubine ahead, and thought that it would be better if she went with Isabella. Looking at each other, the girl thought that they saw each other too often. Viana greeted Her Majesty, who was sitting at the table. She walked further along the table. According to the rules of etiquette, the empress should have invited Viana to sit closer, the higher her status. But now, apart from one place, located in the shadows farthest from the empress, there was no other, and the girl herself asked the empress where her place was. But suddenly, one of the ladies made fun of her, saying that she didn't know where her place was. She was one of the first prince's concubines. But Viana teased her in response, saying that she was apparently new to the palace and therefore did not know etiquette well. Although she was only a concubine, she came from a noble family, and in her past life, she angered Viana so much that she pulled her hair. The concubine flared up, deciding that no one dared tell her anything about etiquette. Both then and now, she considered herself some kind of important person. Becoming part of the imperial family gave Viana power, but she had to act carefully in such situations. Viana really wanted to pull her hair like last time, but now it would do more harm than good. But she advised the concubine to learn the imperial language. After all, how could someone of her status interfere without permission in a conversation between her and Her Majesty? The concubine did not understand what she was hinting at. After all, the concubine insulted the empress with her actions, although she had no influence. When she was publicly insulted, everything changed. An insult to the empress was also considered an insult to the imperial family, and Viana, turning to Her Majesty, asked for confirmation of this. Given the empress's position, this would normally have been simply ignored, and the first concubine also did not mince words about the empress. This girl did indeed have a poor knowledge of etiquette, but this was largely due to the constant disdainful treatment of the empress that she constantly saw. The emperor's first concubine stood up for her, saying that the girl was new to the palace and not yet familiar with etiquette. The first concubine herself apologized to the empress, and she accepted the apology. Turning to the first prince's young concubine, she ordered her to apologize as well. But she really didn't want to do this. The emperor's first concubine continued to insist, and the girl had no choice but to apologize to the empress, and she forgave her. Turning to Viana, the first concubine said that she didn't even know that she knew court etiquette so well. Viana was soon to enter the palace as the crown princess, so she had to know this. And since she was reaching adulthood, this could happen at any moment. But the first concubine reminded her that this was, after all, a marriage with the crown prince, and it was not a fact that everything would happen so quickly. But Viana made it clear that the emperor was behind her, who wanted this marriage, and perhaps everything would happen tomorrow. But the palace had established rules about this. The girl explained to her interlocutor that the emperor's will was the law, and she could not disobey him. And since his will was unyielding, the lady had no choice but to obey. The first concubine invited Viana to sit down, but she asked where her place was, and she looked at the only free chair at the end of the table. And then she added that if the girl had arrived a little earlier, she would have been able to choose a better place. Viana said that she didn't know about the order of arrival, and apparently the first concubine herself arrived quite early. In the end, everything returned to the plan they had conceived before Viana arrived. The furthest seat was reserved for the lowest-ranking person. For a high-ranking noble to sit there at a major event was an insult. They obviously wanted to humiliate her. Viana saw very well how everyone here was protecting their positions. Unlike in her previous life, she did not yet have real strength and power. No one here supported her or stood by her side. Even those who might have sided with her avoided her out of fear of the first empress. The situation turned out to be worse than the girl thought. Until now, Viana had no intention of marrying the crown prince, so she ignored social gatherings, and this was a mistake. The girl thought that they would simply treat her as invisible. and I didn't expect such childish open hostility at all. Being a target was much more unpleasant than Viana thought. Viana apologized to the Empress for being late, but it didn't change anything. Next time, she promised Her Majesty to arrive earlier to take her place. Viana turned around and walked to the end of the table, and she took that very last place. She turned to the girl sitting next to her and greeted her. The young lady was a little embarrassed, but said hello in return. Viana told her that it was her first time at such an event and asked her to be kind to her. The young lady said that it was her first time there too. Judging by her reaction, she was also not used to such gatherings. After all, only nobles from the upper class, or those invited by the royal family, could attend the imperial hunt, and it was rare to meet such a naive creature there. The young lady decided to be the first to introduce herself and asked what her new acquaintance's name was. And then she introduced herself. Her name was Ravina Isel Astea. Hearing this name, Viana realized that this was the Viscount's family on the second prince's mother's side. Now it was clear why she was here. Lady Eliant asked to be called by her name. The young lady was very surprised by this. After all, asking to call by name meant that she wanted to get closer. It was quite difficult to win a place for oneself here, since most of the influential nobles were already firmly on the side of the first empress. But if it was too cramped inside their circle, then Viana decided to start destroying it from the outside. And the first step was the seemingly naive daughter of the Viscount Astea. In response, the young lady also allowed me to call her by her first name. Viana smiled sweetly at Ravina and pretended not to notice the young concubine's cough. Lady Eliant simply ignored her, and then she asked if she was talking to her. If her ears were intact, she couldn't have failed to hear her words. In response, Viana said that she did not understand who she meant, because at such a meeting it is better to clearly indicate who you are addressing. This was an indication of basic politeness. Viana turned to Countess Rustin and asked if she was speaking correctly. The Rustin family was a driving force in the neutral faction, but the most famous figure in their family was not the Count. Their family was famous for the Countess herself. Her manners were impeccable. She even taught the imperial princesses. She was revered and respected throughout the empire. She was the lady whom young noblewomen most often wanted to see as their mentor. Her influence in society, although not as great as that of the Empress, was still significant. Thanks to this chatterbox, Viana now had a reason to win the Countess over to her side. And the supporters of the Crown Prince will naturally be drawn to her, but it would be wiser to enlist the support of a neutral party. Turning to Countess Rustin, Viana said that she had heard that she was considered the very model of noble etiquette, and asked her to share her opinion. Everyone began to whisper that the girl was behaving arrogantly and had only just entered society, but was already daring to lecture others. Countess Rustin must have been speechless at the absurdity of it all. If Viana had been in her place, she would have burned with shame and left the room as quickly as possible. But it wasn't her opinion on etiquette that she was waiting for. The Countess understood Lady Eliant's purpose, and therefore remained silent, but there was no need to hesitate. After all, Countess Rustin had every reason to choose Viana's side. She harbored ill feelings towards the first Empress, and the reason was revealed to be that her younger brother had once been engaged to the Empress, but she had broken off the engagement. Unable to bear such a turn of events, he committed suicide, and their family, left without an heir, fell into decline. From then on, the first Empress became the Countess's sworn enemy. She had been nursing a thirst for revenge for years, and made her move the moment Viana herself became Empress. According to tradition, when a new emperor ascends the throne, the concubines of the previous one are required to leave the palace. But the Empress was allowed to remain within the palace walls even after the death of the emperor. The Empress did not leave even then. Her power was so great that no one dared to resist her presence. But it was Countess Rustin who spoke out against her. She referred to ancient texts and laws, demanding the expulsion of the Empress. Her arguments were so convincing that even learned men recognized them as valid. As a result, the first Empress was expelled from the palace. This conflict between Viana and her was tantamount to an open declaration of hostility, and in such a situation, it was Lady Eliant who was the first to extend her hand to the Countess. The enemy of her enemy was to become her ally. Viana didn't care what people thought about her. She was sure that the Countess was also not interested in what kind of person she was, but she had to take her hand. The Countess said that, as Lady Eliant had rightly noted, When speaking in public where many people gather, elementary politeness requires addressing one's interlocutor clearly. There are times when people neglect even this basic rule and make serious mistakes. Thus, the deal between Countess Rustine and Vienne was concluded. To see how the young girl so subtly grasped the rules of etiquette, which even experienced social ladies often forget, was a true impression for the Countess. People began to say that she was truly a worthy daughter of a noble family, and it was not surprising that the imperial family wanted her as a daughter-in-law. How the public mood changed in favor of Viana. Everyone praised her impeccable welcome speech, saying that it looked like she had been taught by the most sophisticated lady. Smiling, Lady Eliant said that she was far from Countess Rustin. After all, everything she did was just a reflection of her own behavior, and Viana also adopted her composure and manners from her in her past life. The atmosphere around the first empress became icy. The empress, who was particularly sensitive, looked as if she was ready to kill someone. After all, it was she who struck the first blow to Lady Eliant. Viana had only mastered the basics. Such a high assessment made her blush. In everything the basics were most important. Without a minimum of sophistication, one could not consider oneself an aristocrat. While the nobility remained silent, power passed to the side of the crown prince and the neutral forces. The young ladies, fearing shame for breaching etiquette, seemed hesitant in their conversations. Now the salons were ruled by ladies of a respectable age, but the time would come when young people would have to take their place. It was better to win their favor in advance. As far as Viana knew, Astea's family came from the north. Viana said that she had heard that the north was famous for its silks and embroidery, and that one of her friends had bought silk there and never ceased to admire it. And even the dress she was now wearing was made of northern silk. Ravina asked in surprise if this dress was from Louisiana. At that time, it was the most popular brand. Viana admitted that it was Madame Miela's work. She was a designer from Shangri-La, but recently she had been collaborating with Louisia, and the girl's coming-of-age dress was also her creation. Remembering her outfit and jewelry, the assembled ladies were pleasantly surprised that it was all from Louisia. Viana remembered Lady Sheila, with whom she had greeted each other at the coming-of-age ceremony, and she was pleasantly surprised that Lady Eliant remembered her. Viana admitted that for her, everyone who came is a person she should remember. Countess Rustin admitted that the more she gets to know Lady Eliant, the more charming she becomes. But this gave rise to some rumors. The ladies remembered that Louisia belonged to the Pison Trading Guild, and they reminded her of the rumors about her connection with Evan. At this point, the first prince's concubine intervened in the conversation, saying that since Lady Eliant was not yet married, it could not formally be called treason, and asked Lady Maline to apologize to her. And she, giggling, apologized. Viana forgave her, but advised her to choose her words more carefully. The concubine did not calm down, continuing to say that Lady Eliant was to blame for allowing such rumors to spread with a strange man. If she had behaved properly, there would have been no reason for such conversations at all, because as they say, there is no smoke without fire. If Lady Eliant had not behaved suspiciously from the very beginning, such rumors would not have appeared. These efforts were commendable, but the topic was poorly chosen, and Viana said that she now understands what Her Majesty the First Empress felt. The first prince's concubine shouted at Viana to stop talking nonsense. The first empress hissed through her teeth at the Baroness to shut up, and she cast a look full of hatred at Lady Eliant. Viana herself did not understand why such gossip was spread about her. She could not justify herself to everyone, and this awareness of her own defenselessness in the face of gossip was unbearable. As these rumors caused concern to all those present, Lady Eliant offered her sincere apologies. Countess Rustin believed that this could not be Lady Eliant's fault at all. The real blame lay with those who spread these rumors, passing them off as truth. And she looked at the first empress with an unambiguous expression. The scandal of the first empress happened more than 30 years ago. Only people of her generation knew the truth. And now it was not appropriate to raise this topic. Countess Rustin was right. The young ladies who branded Lady Eliant immoral based solely on rumors should apologize to her. And learn to keep yourself in check. The first prince's concubine became the first empress, but she gave her a cold look. Their behavior as imperial concubines was shameful, and from that day on, they were banned from appearing in high society for a whole year. The first prince's concubine, hearing this, was completely indignant, and the first empress asked to see her off. She tried to justify herself, but security took her out into the street. The first empress asked the others to make a proper apology to Lady Eliant, and all the ladies began to carry out the order. With a joyful smile, Viana forgave them, but asked them to be careful in the future not to give in to baseless rumors anymore. Now, if anyone decides to raise this scandalous topic again, they will have to deal with the first empress first. Everything turned out much better than Viana expected. By this time, the emperor had returned from hunting. The first empress ordered everyone to stand up. She herself admitted that she underestimated Lady Eliant. It was an honor for Viana to hear something like that. But the first empress remembered the saying that the stone that sticks out is the first to fall under the hammer, hoping that this did not apply to the Baroness. Viana promised to take her words into account and thanked her for the instructions. Marquise Engrail could never have imagined that she would live to see such a sight. She would have liked to have a longer conversation with Lady Eliant, but this was not the right place for it. If Viana had time, she invited her to visit the Engrail estate and make good connections there. Lady Eliant seemed special to everyone, and it was this trait that they liked. The Marchioness officially invited Lady Eliant to visit her, and she accepted this invitation with pleasure. It was all expected, but after that skirmish, Viana's energy was completely drained. She didn't want to get caught up in the thick of things again. She wanted to find a quiet place and rest. She saw one horse in the stable. Petting his muzzle, Viana quietly asked if he missed her. She asked the groom to look after him. Viana asked where the stableman of the house Eliant was, and the keeper of the imperial stables said that the Marquis's horse was wounded, and Jensen had been away for a short time. The Marquis was fine. He only got a little scratched on the branches while the horse was galloping. Viana breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that nothing terrible had happened. The mere news that the Marquis was safe filled her with relief, and perhaps without realizing it, she began to consider the Marquis part of her family, and that wasn't the worst feeling. Having mounted her horse, she said that she would return in an hour. Even here in the mountains, everything was very well groomed, and the girl had a fleeting thought to ask the Emperor's permission and come here with Lant. But suddenly, she heard a fur coat behind her. Turning around, Viana saw what the prince would say behind her. He was very serious. She couldn't even understand what he was doing here. Suddenly, the horse beneath her reared up, and the leash treacherously broke. Viana couldn't understand what had happened to her horse. At that moment, the girl remembered all her relatives and thought that she should have opened her heart to them earlier and should have been kinder to them. The prince tried to catch up with her. Viana realized that he had come to save her, even though she kept pushing him away. If she had known that everything would turn out this way, she would have accepted this love earlier, and it was in vain that she was so cold with the prince. Viana wondered if the prince would grieve her death. He had mourned her the first time. Lady Eliant wondered why such empty thoughts were visiting her at such a desperate moment. And at that moment, she flew off her horse. But she didn't feel any pain at all. The prince managed to catch her and asked if she was okay. And I was very glad that everything worked out. After all, he already thought that he could lose her and could die from fear for her. Her heart had skipped a beat at the sight of him before, but this thrill was of a different kind. Now Viana wanted to get up. Fortunately, she did not suffer any serious injuries. The prince continued to lie there and did not take his eyes off her. The sun was already setting, and it was necessary to find the others. Viana was trying to figure out where they were. But then suddenly, the prince called her. He couldn't get up from the ground and was holding his side. Viana approached him and asked how he was feeling. He was in pain, and then he stood up and hugged her, realizing that she was still worried about him. It turned out that he was just pretending. He thought that his bride would leave him, and he would pretend to be wounded. But Viana saw that he was completely pale and in a cold sweat. They rolled on the ground together when they fell from that maddened horse, and there was no way he could have escaped unscathed. But he would never admit it. Viana decided to play along with him. The prince decided to kiss her now, and asked what he should expect from her this time. Viana decided that at that moment he was joking. Compared to their past lives, they have really changed a lot, and if the prince was eager to feel his warning, then she would not refuse it. The prince that she is also cold and does not change at all. He extended his hand to her, asking if she would turn away this gesture as well. Viana couldn't push him away anymore. She couldn't turn a blind eye to everything. She didn't want to run from reality anymore. and decided to just accept her feelings. It was a great relief to the prince to know that she was well. After all, Fiona had already fallen hopelessly in love with the prince. She was still troubled by the thought of Irene's appearance, but now the man standing before her was completely different from who he had been in the past. Fiona wanted to risk everything again, trusting her heart, but now was not the best day for confessions. The sky began to look ominous. The prince thought he had said more than he should have, but now the main thing was to get out of the forest. And in such a situation, they didn't have to choose. The prince promised his bride not to collapse from exhaustion in the middle of the journey and not to leave her alone. It started to rain and it was very difficult to go on. He asked Fiona to stay here and wait for him a little. The prince wanted to go and find shelter from the rain. After all, if they sit in this rain until the morning, things will be bad for both of them. Fiona wanted to go with him. Even in such a situation, hearing her excited voice made his heart beat faster. It seemed like he was really hopelessly in love. Although it was dangerous to wander through the mountains in such weather, the prince asked the girl to trust him. And as much as he wanted to press his lips to hers, he knew that now was not the time for such liberties. Suddenly, Fiona grabbed him by the collar and pulled him towards her. Kissing the prince on the lips, she whispered that if he did not return within an hour, she would not forgive him. Fiona was one of those people who always repays her debts with interest. Not expecting this, the prince stood very confused. And once again, he promised to return in an hour. Nothing like this had ever happened in their past life. Fiona was left alone in the darkness, but she didn't feel alone. The girl sat down under a large tree and began to wait. She no longer knew how much time had passed. But then His Majesty came and asked if an hour had passed. He found shelter from the rain. But it felt like an hour had passed to Fiona. Taking his bride by the hand, he led her to the shelter. Now, realizing the depth of her feelings, Fiona's heart began to beat with even more trembling force. The prince told her to go into the shelter first and wait for him inside so as not to freeze. But he was still not there. The cave was small but quite cozy, but she decided to tidy up a bit before His Majesty arrived. Fiona had nothing with her except a scrap of her torn skirt, but even with that, she was able to wipe away the dust and rub it so that it was possible to sit in the cave. Just at that time, the prince returned to the cave holding something in his hands. These were the fruits of the arak tree, and despite their large size, there was very little edible part in them, and the peel was hard as stone. And the berry was tasteless. Fiona thought that the prince had picked it up simply because they were lying around the area. The girl asked him what he was going to do, and he told her to watch carefully. He resolved this fruit with astonishing ease. Apparently, this wasn't the first time he'd done this. He handed one berry to the bride. The taste was not very pleasant, but this berry had a high energy value, so he asked her to eat it. The berry was really very tasteless. Suddenly, a piece of flint appeared in his hand, and the prince set fire to the thick peel of the fruit. Starting a fire on a rainy day is no easy task. Now, he looked more like an experienced hunter than a crown prince. Fiona wondered how the crown prince, raised in the luxury of the palace walls, could be so knowledgeable in such wilderness survival techniques. Apparently, he had often been on campaigns, and this was unexpected. The prince asked how Fiona imagined him, a pampered child raised in luxury, or a snob. But Fiona never considered him arrogant. Princes were usually raised in luxury and abundance, but His Majesty was not as spoiled as they say. There were many who wanted to plunge a knife into his throat and cut him to pieces. Fiona was very surprised that there was an attempt on his life. The crown prince was very lonely. Then Fiona remembered Isabella's words, which she had not understood before. The crown prince was always surrounded by people, but most loved him only for his status or beauty. It had never occurred to her before that someone like him could even feel lonely. If Fiona had thought about his feelings at least once, maybe everything wouldn't have ended so tragically. Those scarred hands were nothing like the hands of a spoiled prince, and the girl finally began to understand what he had to go through. It seems that his lot was not an easy one. Fiona asked if he had any immunity to poisons, as she had heard that some people train their bodies by gradually taking tiny doses of poison to get used to it in case of emergency. It was also useful to have a squad of hired killers nearby, although their services were probably very expensive. Listen to her. The prince couldn't help but laugh. But her thoughts were drawn from stories of people who had strived for power throughout the centuries. Viana really knew how to captivate hearts to the point of unconsciousness. The prince asked how long she intended to immerse him in her spell. It only now dawned on her that they were alone in a cramped space, and their clothes were wet. It was a situation that could easily have given rise to gossip, but the prince was not one to tarnish her reputation, and yet his face was completely devoid of desire. But for some reason, this made the girl angry. Suddenly, a rustling sound was heard. It was Viana who began to untie her dress, but the prince shouted at her to stop doing this immediately. She still took off her outer dress. The prince asked her to put everything back on. He was very embarrassed, and the girl asked if he was going to open his eyes. She decided not to tease him anymore. Now the prince realized that it was just a joke. He admitted that if the girl had gone any further, he would have had a fit. Viana suggested that His Majesty also dry his clothes. He asked if she realized that there was a man in front of her, and he was hopelessly in love with her. But I couldn't just go and turn my whole soul out in front of her. His whole body was on fire. The prince asked Viana to call him Shiss. Only now did the girl realize that he had a high fever, which must have been the result of the fall and being out in the rain for a long time. He acted as if nothing had happened, but she only now realized how serious it was. She was outraged why he didn't say if he felt so bad. Did he really plan to endure it until he collapsed without strength? The prince kept asking to be called by name, and Viana did it, and in response she hugged her tightly. No one ever called him by that name except his mother. He really wanted to hear it fly from the lips of his beloved. Viana didn't even know that he had a nickname. No one had ever called him that in his past life. He was unimaginably happy, and every time she said his name, his heart fluttered so much that he could hardly breathe. Viana promised to call him by that name for the rest of his life, but now she had to take care of his body. He still can't believe that she cares about him so much. Viana saw that his fever was starting to get worse. Even at such a moment, he was very pleased to realize that she was not indifferent. Now she didn't want to explain anything. If she confessed now, her burning face and heart, beating so hard, simply wouldn't be able to withstand such a shock. The prince could not afford to die now. He needed to take revenge on the first concubine who had put Viana in danger. It was no accident that the horse went mad, and the bridle was cut. The prince suspected that the first concubine might try to harm her, but he did not expect her to show hostility so openly. The prince was looking for a bride during his vacation when he could not find her anywhere, and he saw a man shooting a poisoned needle into a horse. His face seemed familiar to him. This man was from the first concubine's entourage. But Viana didn't think that the first concubine herself had done it, and she would hardly have chosen such a crude method. In this, the prince agreed with her. This means that someone could have taken advantage of her close associates. This was probably the work of the first prince's concubine. Although there were quite a few of them, there used to live only one woman from a family famous for good births. She really could do something like that. Viana wanted to understand why the prince thought of her. She told the prince that she had decided to pick on her, and she taught her a lesson, so much so that now she doesn't dare show herself in high society for a whole year. Viana was more interested in the prince's deteriorating condition. She understood that he was hiding the wound, and she asked him to take off his clothes, because he was still wet. But the prince felt very awkward undressing. But the girl insisted that awkwardness was better than worsening health. She had to promise to marry him just to convince him to take off his wet clothes. After that, without thinking, he took off his shirt. While they were in the cave, all they could do was buy time and hope that rescuers would come soon. The prince reassured the girl, saying that he had left a mark outside. Both the marquise and the prince lived under her influence. At this time, the father was walking through the forest in search of his daughter. He was beside himself with worry. He blamed himself for being a worthless father and not showing his feelings to his daughter. He only realized how dear a person was to him when he lost him. Here they reported to him that they had found a mark left by the crown prince. Father of all legs rushed there. I hope that Viana is alive. Morning came, and the rays of the bright sun illuminated the cave. The girl didn't even notice how she fell asleep. She was looking after Sis, after all. Apparently, the heat rose even more during the night. His condition became much more serious, and it was necessary to call someone. He didn't even have the strength to squeeze her hand. Viana promised him to return soon. Coming out of the cave, she determined which side the sun had risen on, and having chosen the right direction, she set off on her journey. Suddenly, she heard some kind of rustling and decided that the owner of the cave had returned. Animals that dug their own burrows were usually carnivorous. She couldn't leave Sis alone. Suddenly, the Marquis appeared from behind the bushes. The first thing he asked was if the girl was hurt. She was surprised to see the Marquis in such a panicked and divided state. It was not like him at all. Although in the current situation, with the crown prince missing, it was not surprising. Vaiana said that we needed to call a doctor immediately. In her entire life, she had never seen the Marquis angry. She decided that he was angry that she left the sick prince alone. Vaiana decided that the prince was much more important to him than she thought. In their past lives, they were indifferent to each other, but in this one, they became much closer. Or it was her delusion. But suddenly, the Marquis began to shout that he didn't care what would happen to the prince if he couldn't even protect her next to him. The girl stood and looked at him with astonished eyes. The Marquis decided that she had fallen from her horse and had a fever, but she was wandering alone. Now Vaiana realized that he was not angry at her. She began to explain that the horse's fall and fever were not hers, but the crown prince's. Then he hugged his daughter and looked into her eyes. At this time, knights were already hurrying towards them from all sides. Everyone was looking for the crown prince. Even Count Leonel, Sis's closest friend and the youngest commander of the royal guard in the history of the empire, arrived here. The Marquis stood up for his daughter, asking who dared to speak so loudly in his presence. Leonel apologized, but it was a question of His Majesty's safety. He insisted that Lady Eliant tell him where he was. Vaiana didn't think it was surprising how openly the Marquis expressed his feelings, and hastened to assure her that everything was fine. She showed in which cave the principal was located, that he urgently needed a doctor because of the high fever. The Marquis's face was still tense. After all, she was the Marquis's unusual daughter, and he himself was standing next to her, so Count Leonel should have treated her much more respectfully. Suddenly, the Marquis said that they needed to return. Vaiana asked if he would go to the crown prince, but he had no intention of doing so. After all, he couldn't leave his daughter alone, and even if the crown prince were to die now, the only person the Marquis should be with is Vaiana. After all, she is his beloved daughter. Only now did she realize that his clothes were completely soaked. It seemed he had wandered in the rain all night trying to find her. When he heard that the girl had disappeared, he was very sorry about everything, and if something had happened to her, he would not have forgiven himself. Vaiana burst into tears and called him father for the first time in her life. She lived her life clinging miserably to love, and, tired of suffering, gave it up, vowing never to crave anyone's love again. Yet I longed for her again. This meant only one thing: she still loved all these people. After all, she is her father's daughter. Lant never acted like this. And now he straightened up and didn't want to tell her anything. He couldn't sit idly by, hearing that she was in danger. To understand why the quiet boy became so stubborn, we need to go back to the moment when, after being rescued, he safely returned to the mansion. Vaiana and the Marquis returned home safely, but there was some commotion there. It turned out that Lant had disappeared. He disappeared after hearing about his sister's disappearance, but all the knights went looking for Vaiana and were unable to go looking for him. Luckily, he was later found in the forest, where a hunting tournament was taking place. For the child, this was too dangerous behavior to simply write it off as childishness. Vaiana couldn't just turn a blind eye to this. He thought that Vaiana was more important than him. Vaiana couldn't understand where the puppy he used to be had gone. She accused him of being rude, and he apologized. The sister asked if he understood that he had acted recklessly. After all, he no longer belonged only to himself. The entire house of Eliant placed its hopes on him. Such reckless behavior was unacceptable in his position. She understood that her brother wanted to help her, but she asked if his behavior had actually helped her. His actions only made things more difficult for those around him. But he was still too young. He needed to receive help, not give it. But he really wanted to help, and when he heard that they were missing, he couldn't sit still. Lant was in so much pain that he couldn't breathe. It seemed like his heart would break if he didn't see that they were alive. Vaiana was also very worried about him. Now it was fashionable to catch one's breath. A few days later, an excited Anasia came running. She asked if the girl was okay. After all, she heard that something serious had happened to her. Anasia asked the girl if she was sure that everything could be left as is. After all, there were bad rumors going around. Vaiana was well aware that she now had the worst reputation. Rumors that she was the Marquis's stepdaughter had haunted her since childhood. And after she let her nanny go, The servants who were fired along with her started new gossip about her. But now a rumor has been added that an unmarried woman spent the night with a man. Now they said of her that she was a seductive slut who twisted all men into ropes. They also added that she was a witch who ate the crown prince. Anasia again asked why she wasn't doing anything about these rumors. Even the imperial house remained silent, and they too could do nothing. But nothing could be done, because the prince still had not come to his senses. Viana said that an accident occurred that day, which resulted in His Majesty being injured. But he plans to use this incident to undermine the eldest prince's influence. Contrary to what was said about the crown prince being unconscious and on the verge of death, he was in fact alive and well. At first, he wanted to get out of bed right away, but the rumors about Vian were spreading as if someone was deliberately inflating them, so she changed her plan. It couldn't be said that the first concubine had nothing to do with it, but she wasn't the main instigator. If Viana's assumptions are correct, then the culprit is the first prince's new concubine, the same one who recently bought a lot of dresses from Louisia. If we talk about what happened at the tournament, then she is quite capable of such antics, but she was unlikely to be able to come up with such a clever method. The prince's plan sounded like an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and rumors contradicted rumors. And she told Anasia her plan, but she started shouting that this wasn't right. She couldn't help but get angry, because if something went wrong, Viana's reputation in the aristocracy would be destroyed. And what she was going to do was give them some real ground, but the girl was sure that success would give her more than she could lose. The prince wanted to use this incident to blame the assassination attempt on the crown prince and suppress the supporters of the first prince. But before he could act, malicious rumors about Vian appeared. They grew and now said that the prince's injury was her fault, and if irrefutable evidence did not appear, she could be accused of attempting to assassinate the heir, and soon they would begin to question her suitability for the role of the future crown princess. In the worst case, she faced the risk of breaking off the engagement. But if her plan works, she will never be dragged into such gossip again. Viana believed that Anasia would help her, because she was her person. But if she agrees, it won't be easy to convince Evan. If Evan thinks Vian is in danger, he won't budge, even if it costs him his life. This plan had to be carried out simultaneously throughout the entire territory, and Evan's help was essential. There was something Anasia didn't tell Viana. Evan returned a few days ago, and it looks like he deliberately hid it. The western branch of the Pison Union was attacked, but who could decide on an alliance that even the emperor could not easily touch? The attackers were Inayari, although usually they attacked only small villages. Buildings were destroyed, food and goods disappeared. There were few dead, but there were, on the contrary, more wounded. If the supplies were missing, it would be like Inayari's style. But to risk and attack a trading house inside the city for the sake of some supplies is already a reason for the empire to begin a full-scale operation against them. Some trading houses were also hit, but this one was hit the hardest. There was no lord in those lands. This was originally the territory of the Duke of Dishi's house. 10 years ago, this land was transferred to self-government by citizens. It turned out that Duke Daisha renounced all rights to these lands. He refused all the resources produced there and taxes. It was said that the current representative of the citizens once saved the Duke's life. It turned out that the empire would not deal with this matter. No connection could be found between Inayari and Duke Dish, but Vian felt like she was missing something. During the repulse of the attack, Inayari Evan was wounded. Fortunately, his life was not in danger, but he will have difficulty moving for some time. Viana said she needed to see him urgently, but Anasia screamed that this couldn't be done. After all, if she goes to Evan now, she could make the situation worse. To which Viana said that then she definitely needed to go to him, because that's exactly where we should have started. Anasia didn't know if they were doing the right thing, but the mere thought of the Marquis appearing made me shudder, because he had probably heard the rumors too. The Marquis forbade Vian to leave the house, but since they left anyway, returning now won't change anything, and if we act according to plan, then at least something will work out. Anasia suggested that they think things through first, since Vian didn't have to act on her own. If these were just rumors, then even if something went wrong, it could be sorted out. But if she went public, then she wouldn't be able to get out of it. But that way, the chances of success were higher. Viana hoped that Anasia would keep her word and help her, but it was better for her not to go out. It won't be very good if they find out that she is also involved. Viana is the legitimate daughter of Duke Eliant, and it is unlikely that anyone would dare harm her in the city center. Instead of staying with her, Viana asked her to settle the matter she had spoken of earlier. Anasia agreed to this. The girl expected the ballet to be noisy, but not paper that. The atmosphere was more oppressive than she thought. Everyone was whispering how Viana dared to show up here. The thought was going through the girl's head that they should be whispering about her cleaning. If she gets angry with them now, she will become a tactless and ill-mannered person who eavesdrops on other people's conversations. Although there was no reason to play along with their performance. To see them whispering like rats in a gutter, there were many other ways to repay them. It was unlikely that anyone would dare to openly tell her everything to her face. Suddenly, one of the ladies shouted, who Viana dared to call a beauty. She was a very young lady. It seems she didn't even go through the coming-of-age ceremony. She was either unspoiled by high society and pure, or stupid. It's a shame, but Viana isn't one to be stiflingly condescending because of someone's ignorance. Turning to the young lady, she said that it was eavesdropping on someone else's conversation. The girl screamed that it was Viana who brought the prince to this state, and now she was shamelessly walking around here. The young lady was wearing a fashionable dress, and there was a woman who looked like her mother too, wearing an elegant designer dress. So their family was rich or influential, but Viana couldn't remember their faces. Approaching them, Viana asked for forgiveness, and then she asked their last name, but the girl didn't want to name her. Viana asked if the first lady had the right to address her, or if perhaps she was a member of the royal family. The girl shouted that Viana really was crazy, as rumors say. The girl's mother bowed and apologized to Lady Eliant. She said that the girl was not herself. This lady turned out to be smart. A nobleman of lower rank could not start a conversation with a nobleman of higher rank. If such a violation were to occur, it would not only be ignorance, but also disdain or even condescension. This was enough to provoke a duel between nobles, or even a war between estates. They probably didn't even think that Viana would be used as an example for the royal family as a bride. The girl's mother asked for leniency towards them, and she forced her daughter to apologize to Mrs. Eliant. It seems that in her life, there has never been a situation that hurt her pride. She is fearless and proud. Lady Eliant asked their surname again, and the mother replied that they were Angriber. It was an old and respected family, and it was a shame to use it as an example to others. And then Viana said that she had never heard of such a thing.